AB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It's Thursday, the last day of August, Ryan. We're going to finally kick into September starting tomorrow. Notre Dame is going to play their second game of the season, first at home against the Tennessee State Tigers. And what we're going to do today, Ryan, is we're going to do some keys to victory, and they're going to be a little different than we normally do keys to victory for obvious reasons. And then we'll make our game predictions, and we'll follow a similar format. Talk a little about some of the big games from this weekend that we're going to be paying attention to, Ryan, and then we will have a mailbag. Normally on Thursdays we won't have a mailbag, but I'm just being honest. Ryan and I talked about this. We're just not going to have a ton of in-depth analysis on this game because we don't want to convince y'all that, hey, this game is something that it's not. And but we'll dive into that. But Ryan, obviously, take opponent aside, it's going to be our first chance to see Notre Dame at home this season, and yet another chance for us to see what this Notre Dame team is made of.
Yeah, I mean, and every time you get a home game, it's exciting for obvious reasons, right? I mean, you talk about the fans getting back in the stadium. You talk about the parents of the athletes being a chance to be at home and to enjoy kind of the camaraderie with the Notre Dame fans and the tailgating and all that great stuff. And then also you have some recruits that are going to be on campus as well. So, I mean, it's home games are always fun, man, no matter who they're against. And this was one that should be a nice ending for Notre Dame, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, and it's going to be one of the interesting ones for this weekend, Ryan. When you look at the visitors you talked about, there's going to be several commits on campus, mostly the local kids. Although I do believe Justin Thurman's planning on coming up from Florida.
Yep.
Some interesting players. Obviously, Jerome Bettis Jr. is on campus. Some relatives of some all-time great running backs. Sean Alexander's nephew, Austin, who got offered yesterday, is going to be on campus this weekend. Some other players are going to be on campus. You've already got an update on Cal Thrush. We're going to have a couple more coming up here later today. I think T.Y. Hilton's got a couple kids going to be on campus this weekend, which is pretty cool. And then, of course, the big one is Logan Saldate, who's making his official visit to Notre Dame this weekend, which is something, I mean, you reported back when he committed that this was going to be something he was going to do. But it'll be nice to get him on campus and just solidify everything. He's off to a hot start. I believe he plays again on a Thursday this week, right? Didn't they play Thursday last week? And then he has a Thursday night game as well tonight.
Yep.
If you haven't seen it, Ryan has a preview. So it's Logan and Kennedy Urlacher both tonight, right, Ryan? So he has previews for those games up tonight, and then also links to how you can watch those games. And then, of course, tomorrow we'll have the full preview for the rest of the Notre Dame class. So we have all that stuff going on, Ryan. But the main event is still Notre Dame against Tennessee State. And it's a game that Notre Dame is favored to dominate. There's not even a spread for this game.
I was going to say, are they technically favored in this game?
Yeah. I mean, they're favored so much there's not even a spread. But, Ryan, these are games where we kind of laugh and joke, but these are still important games because games like this against an opponent, I've always said this, players aren't stupid. And you can lie to them all you want and say, hey, look, we've got to play, we've got to really play our A game, or Tennessee State's going to give us a game. They're not idiots. They watch the film. They know that this is a far inferior opponent. But this goes back to what you and I talked about earlier in the week on Tuesday, which is we're going to learn this week what kind of leadership this Notre Dame football team has on Saturday, because at the end of the day, a well-coached and a team, even more so with great leadership, because this is beyond coaching, because coaches can rail on you all you want, but you know what they're saying isn't, really the case. This is where leadership comes from, and it comes down to, it's not about Tennessee State, fellas. This is about us.
Sure.
And so that's something that I'm very curious to see. And that's going to kind of bleed through all of our keys to victory, because they're not so much keys to victory. Notre Dame could play poorly in every phase that we discussed today and still win by 4 touchdowns. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But it's about building on the momentum that you established last week. Don't take step backs. Mentally, technically, schematically, all those type of things. Don't view this as the walk-through game that we all know that it is. Those are going to be sort of at the foundation of every key that you and I come to, because that's what this is all about, Ryan. It's about building into future games and not taking a step back, not with win and loss, because that's going to happen. As you and I have said, Ryan, what is it? It's not about the W or the L. It's about the process. If the process takes care of itself, or if the process is the way it needs to be, the wins and losses take care of themselves.
I mean, 100%. And I would say that also from the leadership perspective of things, because the four captains of Notre Dame, but we know the leadership extends beyond that, right? I mean, like guys like Audric Estime are certainly leaders on this football team, and a couple Blake Fisher is a leader on this football team. There's other guys that, although they don't have the C on their chest, we know that they bring a level of leadership to the table. But anytime you're playing against not only an inferior opponent, you're also playing at home, right? So there's a lot of things that can kind of break attention a little bit this weekend, right? There could be a lot of things that can make you look sideways in certain instances, right? Family are on campus, you're playing an inferior opponent, you're coming off of a trip from Dublin, Ireland. Like there's a lot of things that can really destroy attention, I think is the best way to put it for this week. So it's about the captains and the leaders on this team to make sure that we remain focused. And that extends obviously up, right? Not extends up, extends down from the coaching staff, to be able to really remain focused against a team that you should beat by a large margin. Like there's no doubt about that. So I think you have to come into this one with you have to understand what you're going against, right? Like let's not fool these kids, right? Because they're not stupid, to your point, right? Like if I'm Coach Freeman, like it's not like one of those situations where it's like, guys, we really need to come out and play this week, or else we could get upset. Like, no, man, like that's probably not going to happen. It's just more remain focused and be attentive to details. If you're attentive to details, Notre Dame will roll, and then you'll go into the NC State game next week, and you'll feel like you're in a pretty good spot coming off of two good victories and kind of working on the focus aspect of certain things that are going to be kind of your bread and butter or your identity this year. So I just think it's kind of like blocking out the outside noise, coming back from Dublin, parents are going to be on campus, recruits are going to be on campus, you're playing against an inferior opponent. There's a lot of distractions. So get rid of those distractions, maintain focus on the process at hand. And I think Notre Dame will be fine going into week 3.
Keep that standard.
Week 3.
Yeah, it's game. Yeah, it's we're just going to go with what game it is for Notre Dame. Simple as that, right? No, it's about the standard, Ryan. And you even use the word process multiple times, and that's what this weekend is really about. I did love this comment, though, from T Guns, our guy T Guns. He says, I hear that Eddie George won't be coaching this weekend, but also that Tennessee State just got in a new transfer running back. So, I mean, look, this is a team that is going to – here's what we will say about Tennessee State. The issue is they're inferior from a talent standpoint. But what I would be shocked if we don't – I will be shocked if we don't see this team come out and play really, really hard, Tennessee State. I fully expect that. They're not
coming up the South End to get their ass kicked.
No,
they're
no,
not doing that. So
to get embarrassed in a way, because there's two ways of getting embarrassed. One is you get embarrassed in the scoreboard. The other way is I got embarrassed because I physically got my butt kicked and I didn't give effort. I didn't leave it all out there. These kids know, look, this isn't a really good team, and we may not have much of a chance, but we're going to go out there and give them everything we got and make them earn it. And if Notre Dame's not prepared for that, they're still going to win, but it could be a win where you kind of have a little bit of egg on your face, number one, perception-wise. But number two, you lose the momentum you've spent all fall camp building. And that's going to be the key. And that's going to be the focus on our keys to victory. So as we get started on the keys to victory breakdown, Ryan, we'll begin with the offense. And the first one really is it's about being who you are. And one thing that we saw last season, and this is the reason that yesterday when I was talking about what we know and what we don't know, is we really still don't know how good this offensive line is going to be. I thought the week 1 performance was outstanding. I mean, when you consider how good Navy is at stopping the run last year, how many guys they had coming back, just the level of production you had on a very limited number of snaps. There just was nothing to be upset about from last week's game. There's things that need to be corrected and all that, but just big picture, very strong performance. We saw performances like that last year. The question is still, can you string these together week after week after week? Because ultimately, when we talk about that standard of who Notre Dame is, Marcus Freeman has said all along, we are going to be a line of scrimmage built football team. And if this unit comes out and plays with the focus and the fire that it needs to, then that's going to bleed into everything else. And so, and then also create some momentum for this offense as they get ready to go play really scrappy, good, well-coached defense a week from Saturday against NC State. And so that to me is number one key, is come out and dominate the line of scrimmage. Don't just, establish the line of scrimmage, like I said. And it's about, early down success, which leads to, not getting into those ruts where are punting when you shouldn't be punting. It's about dominating the line of scrimmage and playing with an attitude and a demeanor that you need to have, but also still maintaining, hey, we're trying to do something here. We're playing within the scheme. We're playing with sound technique. We're playing as one. But you do that and you just go out there and dominate. That's going to be the key to me for the number. I mean, really, it's at the heart and soul of what this game is going to be about for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean, I feel really bad talking like this, man, against when Notre Dame has a football game to play. But I mean, you're right, Brian. Like this is one of those situations where I'm trying to be nice here, man. I really am. But it's like because I'm looking at this game and I'm saying, like, we understand the process is what we need to stick to, right, in this situation. But the outside noise is kind of what I talked about in the beginning. And like, there's going to be some talking kind of just rudimentarily through the locker room, through people, through parents and everything in between. But I really think that for me, it's like, this is a game where you just want to maintain and continue to build upon what the standard is that you've been creating, right? Like, that's the biggest thing for me. And Coach Freeman, we know, to your point, we know what this team wants to look like. You still want to be a team that is built inside out and dominates in the spots that Notre Dame has traditionally been very good at. There's no doubt. So I think I would just say it like this, like, let's dive into the mentality. Let's dive into the identity, right? Like, there should be no like if, ands, or buts about that coming out of this football game. What's your identity as a football game going into last week against Navy, coming out of Navy, should be the same as what it is going in to Tennessee State and coming out of Tennessee State. Maintaining that identity, I think, is a great way to put it. We know what Marcus Freeman wants this team to be. We know that what this team can be. We saw a glimpse of what the team could be last week in Dublin. This week, there should be no question about that, right? Like, the worst case scenario is, for whatever reason, you struggle up front for some reason, and then you have to win this game just because Tobias Merriweather and Jaden Thomas and those guys are better than the players that are across from them. You have to stray away from your identity. No, man. Like, you want this one to be where you are what you are, and you continue to build off of what you are.
And even the run game success is because Audric Estime bounces off a tackler 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage and then gets outside and runs for 50 yards. Kind of like, remember that 91-yard touchdown run against North Carolina with Kyron Williams.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh, what a great job by the offensive line. They rushed for X number of yards. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, on the 91-yard touchdown run, he got hit by 3 guys 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage, right? It's just
Seriously.
That team just wasn't that good, and Kyron was a heck of a player. And so you just don't want that success in the victory. I mean, you win by 40, 50. But you could still look at the game and say, but they were sloppy. They just out-talented that other team, right? And that's where we keep talking about the standard. And as Marcus Freeman said, the standard begins with the Notre Dame defensive or the Notre Dame lines. And trust me, we'll have plenty to say about the Notre Dame defensive line. Number two, Ryan, one thing that drives me nuts about games like this is, and this has been true for Notre Dame in the past and against teams that are better than Tennessee State, this is one of the most outmatched teams that Notre Dame has ever played against, in my opinion. Although I will say this, one of the things I do like about their team is I do like their front four, and their most talents on defense.
Yes.
In my view, that's where their best players are. Yep. So I do like that part of the matchup. And I'll be honest, there's a couple positions where I think they have better players than what Navy had. At least one corner spot and one safety spot, I would argue that.
Agree.
And I would argue that they're going to be a little bit more athletic at the middle linebacker spot, not the Ramos kid from last week, but the Will Harbor kid, which I talked about last week. But overall, they're just going to be way undersized, and except for the nose guard, it's 380. But they're going to be way undersized and just shorter and not as big and not as fast as what Notre Dame is going to be. And what I hate is games like this, Ryan, is you just come out and you just kind of run it down their throat and just kind of overpower them, and that's all you do. And you just get real vanilla and real basic, and you just win big because you're just better than they are. That's fine, I guess. I mean, it drives me nuts. I want to see you come out and continue to build your identity. And what this team is going to have to be is a run vertical and throw vertical team, right? And so when I mean run vertical, you're running right at people, right? You're downhill. you're going at people. But then also, I think that has to be complemented by a pass offense that's also willing to go vertical. We've talked about you got to go left and right and do all that. But I mean, I want to see a team that's even more aggressive. Those opportunities weren't necessarily there a ton versus Navy last week, mainly because the plays were so limited. And I mean, Notre Dame was at 28-0, and they were in like the 30s for plays. I think something like that, Ryan. They only had like 57 for the whole game. And that included like 7 on the last drive of the game. And there weren't a ton of plays to be had. I want to see more. I want to see not more. I want to see them remain aggressive, because I think they were aggressive last week. They were just aggressive in a little different ways, hitting the quick outs and the things along those lines. They did take some early play action shots and all that good stuff. However, this is a different defense where I think there's going to be more opportunities for perimeter outside shots. Whether they be from the slot, whether they be from overs, or whether they just be straight goes. I do want to see more of those in this game, because I think that the situation will call for it. The defensive scheme will allow it. Whereas Navy, you didn't necessarily want to have a lot of plays where you're holding the ball for 3.5 seconds because of the way that Navy pressures. And we even saw that even on some of the deeper balls, some of the deeper routes that Notre Dame had last week, Navy was able to still pressure Sam Hartman because they brought more guys than Notre Dame had to block. And so you had to manipulate the pocket that way. That won't be the case with Tennessee State, at least from what they've shown. So I want to see an aggressive game plan that builds on, and I know, you run it up and all that. I don't care. Be aggressive. Take your shots. Go at them. Don't just come out and run 9 of the first 10 plays and go down and score a touchdown. Like, what does that prove? I mean, yeah, you should be able to do that. You're Notre Dame, right? But did you really do anything that helps? You're not going to do that against NC State next week. You're not going to do that against Ohio State in 3 weeks. Continue to build your offense and who you want to be. That's something I would like to see from them early in this game.
Well, Notre Dame is built from the inside out. They're a great offensive line in theory, and they have great running back room, obviously, right? But there is an overcorrection that happens as well when you try to steer into the identity, because then people would say, if you get too much into the identity, it's like, I'm just going to ram it down your throat because, hey, man, can't stop it at the end of the day. And that doesn't, to your point, that doesn't build a cohesive offense. That builds what you had last year if you're Notre Dame, where you could run the ball at a very high clip most weeks, but then there was always going to be that one game every so often where it's not sustainable because you're not an overall all-around offense. And I agree. I think that, for me, like when you look at Tennessee State, I really think that Bryce Phillips is a good player. I think Josh Green is a good player at safety. I think Bryce is a really good player at corner. I think that, especially for his level, I think their other corner, number 30, is a pretty solid football player for his level. But at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, Tobias Merriweather, Deion Colsey, Jaden Thomas, Jaden Greathouse, Braylon James, if he gets some play, Rico Flores Jr., like they're better football players. They're more talented athletes, right? So they should be able to win a lot of one-on-one matchups. And the crazy part about Tennessee State is that not the crazy part. The thing about them, though, is that they are a team that is going to allow their defensive backs play a lot of man-on-man coverage at times. They're going to play some single high, where it's going to be hard for that single high free safety to get over the top on some of these vertically oriented plays. Like it's going to be very difficult for them. So Bryce Phillips, Harper, they're going to have some one-on-one opportunities against Notre Dame wide receivers. And Notre Dame has to win the one-on-ones because at the end of the day, that's 2 of their better football players defensively. And if you were able to show that, like, hey, man, we can win those one-on-one battles consistently, then Tennessee State's they're probably going to pack it in a little bit early in this football game. Because if Bryce Phillips is giving up big plays, Josh Green's giving up big plays, maybe from the slot, like Tennessee State's going to be in a lot of trouble. And I think Notre Dame needs to show that they can attack every level of this field against Tennessee State.
Key number 3, Ryan, and key points 1 and 3 are going to be the same on both sides of the ball. Just preparing you guys for it now, because again, this is about a bit more about building blocks. Number 3 is, Ryan, be smart. You've got to be smart. Don't build bad habits, right? That's a key. That's something that can happen in games like this. Don't build bad habits. And when you look at a team that you can come out and your quarterback maybe takes shots that he wouldn't normally take, he's not making reads. He's just, I like this matchup, and I think we can win there, and I'm not going to read the defense, and I'm not going to do any of those type of things. I'm just going to take a shot, or I'm going to try to make a one-handed catch when I should do 2, or I'm going to try to make a highlight reel play. you can have that mentality when you're playing an inferior opponent. And I don't want to see that. I want to see them come out with the same attention to detail and focus to say, hey, look, all the things that matter to beat Ohio State need to matter to beat Tennessee State. Execute your play hard, play smart, execute football, go out there and dominate and not try to play hero ball because you can get away with it against this team, because that's how bad habits get developed and that's how you lose momentum. And that's important to me is be smart, right? Be aggressive, run your offense, do all that kind of stuff. And this isn't from a play calling standpoint. This is from a player standpoint, right? Where, hey, we're going to still play the game the way we know we're supposed to play it and the way we're taught to play it, and not try to freelance and have some fun or make a highlight reel or get on Sports Center or anything like that. Those things are
Sure.
not what I want to see.
Well, I mean, I would even give you an example from last week. The play that everyone wanted to talk about after the game was where, of course, Sam Hartman broke the pocket, rolled to his left, threw a touchdown to Jaden Greathouse, because those plays outside of structure is what everyone loves, everyone wants to talk about, and the easy ones for fans to love, right? Because it's like, that is unique, that's different. And it's awesome that Sam Hartman can make those types of plays. That brings a complete different dynamic to the game of football, especially for Notre Dame, what we've seen at quarterback over the last couple of years. It's a great dynamic to have. But the fault that a quarterback can have at times is when you are so successful winning out of structure. And I look at Caleb Williams at this fact at some points, right? Because Caleb Williams is the best quarterback in college football, in my opinion. But he at times will look past an easy read just to get out of structure, to extend the football, because he's Superman, right? And that's a bad habit. When he gets to the NFL, he's going to have to chill a little bit a little bit, right?
Ryan,
you need to win from in structure.
And we
first,
saw that
then.
last year. We saw that against Oregon State last year. We saw it against Washington State last year. We saw it against Utah last year, right? And some of that stuff got him in trouble, whether it be banged up against Utah, mistakes, not efficient on offense. Unfortunately, Notre Dame didn't have a game plan to kind of take them out of that. But Oregon State did, and that's a big reason their offense struggled. Washington State played very well against USC's offense last year. Their offense just couldn't score. That was their problem. So those are that. I think you're absolutely right. Drake May, I believe, is this way as well, where sometimes Drake May gets a little bit too, I got to go make a play, right? And you can get into those bad habits. And to your point, you don't want to see Sam Hartman doing that. You don't want to see Audric Estime. I know you could have bounced that run and maybe stiff-armed a guy in one, but stay true to your course, right? Like, stay true to what we're doing up here. Stay within the structure. Those are all things you want to see. And then when the opportunities are presented that come naturally for you to make those plays, make them.
Yep.
Right. And that's fine. I mean, there may be opportunities for one-handed catches. There may be opportunities to dive and lay out for the ball. There may be opportunities to bounce a run that you want to go in a gap, but you have to bounce it. There's going to be opportunities to play out of structure, but you don't invent it. Stay within what you're trying to do and just continue to build that momentum. And those are going to be the keys for the Notre Dame offense. And if they do that, Ryan, they're going to look really good. They're going to dominate, Tennessee State early, and we're going to get to see a lot of the backups. That's the goal. And people have asked, well, why did they leave the starters in so long last week? And I honestly, I think part of it, and this is just my opinion, I haven't been told this by anybody, I think part of it is because they anticipate that they're going to be emptying the bench this week. And you go 2 games before NC State and your starters are playing 30, 35 snaps, that's it. Then you don't really have the same 2-game advantage that you would normally have of just the number of game reps. You're now at like 1 game worth of reps. And I think that's part of it. Hopefully they're able to get those guys at it. Like, if the starters are playing in the third quarter, you want it to be because Coach Freeman just feels that they need a little bit more work because it is game 2, not because they sputtered through the first 2 quarters and they need another quarter to put this team away.
Sure. That's
what I don't want to see. Let's move over to the defense, Ryan, and it's going to be the same story in key number 1. Dominate up front. You say, because this goes back to the original theme, right, Ryan, is you have a standard. You call it the golden standard. Marcus Freeman has said, this is who we're going to be at the University of Notre Dame as long as I'm here. We are a trench-oriented team. We are a line-oriented team. That means our O-line, our D-line are going to be who we build this program around. And so when you're playing a game like this, the best way to tell if you're living to that standard is by dominating in the areas that you say your program is all about. Offensively, it's establishing line of scrimmage, dominating up front on that side of the ball, and on defense, it's about dominating Tennessee State. And I would say it's even more important here because you are playing a significantly inferior opponent. where I actually think Tennessee State has a couple pretty good. Like, they have a couple guys that won't shock me if the Terrell Allen kid. I'm actually surprised he didn't transfer to a Division I school after last season. Like, there's some MAC schools, some Sun Belt schools that I think that kid could play at, in my opinion. The Walker kid, that's their Viper position essentially. It's a good football player, but their offensive line, it's not the truth. That's not the same, Ryan. Their offensive line is not very good, and you should dominate this game. And I do have a question about this too, Ryan. Is I'm curious against more traditional offenses if we're going to see the same waves of linemen that we saw against Navy. That's going to be another question that I have. But it's this, man. You got to dominate up front and just take this game over. They have decent skill players. Don't let them get involved in the game because you were just dominating the line of scrimmage. You said this when you and I were talking the other day, Ryan, and I'll let you build on the point that you said to me. You said, honestly, this team shouldn't score on Notre Dame's defense. They shouldn't, because Notre Dame should be able to control the line of scrimmage in a way where, barring a blown coverage or something like that, this team should not be able to put drives together that get into the end zone. They just shouldn't.
They shouldn't. I mean, they have one good running back coming back. They have a quarterback that can hurt you outside of structure at times, but not consistently. They have a couple talented receivers as far as from a talent perspective, but you talked about the numbers the other day. Like last year, they were a team that gave up a whole lot of sacks, a whole lot of tackles for loss. They play behind the sticks a ton. And I just think that when I look at the opportunity to have Riley Mills and Jordan Botelho and Javante Jean-Baptiste and Howard Cross and, whatever the other defensive lineman, Joshua Burnham, like some of these other defensive linemen, they're going to get opportunity, Junior Tuihalamaka. I mean, I look at that and I say, like, there just should be no shots that they're able to move the line of scrimmage in their favor. I mean, that's just kind of where you are. Like, I even had a source tell me that close to Tennessee State, like, they're not a good pass blocking team, and they know they're not, right? And I mean, so should any of those kids be able to block Jordan Botelho one-on-one? Should any of them be able to block Riley Mills one-on-one? I think absolutely not, right? And that team, if they're playing behind the sticks, I think they're going to be in a really bad situation, man, because this is one of those teams where you don't have to manufacture pressure. Like, it's just like, you send 3 to 4, and you should be able to get pressure in the backfield against both the run and the pass game. And if that's true, then you just let Benjamin Morris and Cam Hart be who they are, right? You just let Xavier Watts make plays on the back end. You just let your linebackers flow and read. I just think that your defensive line should be able to control this football game and put this team in chaos early, because they're going to be playing in a lot of 2nd and 10, 2nd and 12, 2nd and 14s. 3rd and 9s. Like, they should just not be in good situations on a down the distance perspective. And if that is the case, I think they're going to have a tough time throwing the football consistently against Notre Dame.
Point number 2, Ryan, is attack the ball. This is one of those weeks where we said don't develop bad habits. I think it's a week for defensively where you develop good habits. And it's a habit in an area that Notre Dame was not good at last year. Sure. I was very encouraged by the fact that Notre Dame forced 2 fumbles, forced the ball to get on the ground. And here's the thing I liked about those 2 forced fumbles, Ryan, is they weren't like the normal forced fumbles that you get against Navy, which are pitch related per se. The one was kind of that way. It was a bit of a high pitch, but you'll see stuff like that on traditional offenses with tosses and with bubble screens and now screens and stuff like that. I thought the fact that Notre Dame was able to force 2 fumbles in this game was very encouraging to me. We didn't get to see them get a lot of chances to really do a whole lot from the standpoint of like pass breakups and things like that, just because of the nature of the Navy offense. So I want to see some of those things. I want to see on one of these sacks by one of the Notre Dame defensive linemen, the ball gets stripped out. I want to see pass breakups. I want to see an interception or 2 in this game. Like, I want to see this team be very focused on attacking the football in this game. Now, again, it's like offense. You don't do it outside of structure. You don't try to undercut a route you're not taught to undercut because you think you're going to get. I'll give you an example. So I was playing in a game in high school, and we were playing this team, and we were blowing them out. I already had 4 touchdowns in the game, and we were winning big. And I was like, I want to get a pick 6. So I just kept trying to bait the quarterback into getting a pick 6. And eventually he was dumb enough to throw it at me, and I picked it off and ran it back for a touchdown, right? You can do that against a team that sucks, but you know what that did not do? At all prepare me to go play well the next week. It was playing hero ball. It was about me. It wasn't about the team. It wasn't about the defense. It wasn't about the structure. That's not the kind of attitude that you want, right? If Cam Hart's going to get a pick six, it's because you're playing within the structure. You read the quarterback properly and you stepped in front of it in the right manner and you took it back, or you had a breakup. Because you may pick one of those passes off, but that's also how you miss on that route. He catches the ball and then runs for 50 yards, and they put one on the board in a game where they shouldn't put it on the board. So again, play within structure, but within that structure, Ryan, I want to see the linebackers and the defensive ends and the secondary being very aggressive attacking the football, getting breakups, interceptions, forced fumbles, and things along those lines. The only way I'll be happy if that's not happening is if the coverage is just so good, they're just throwing the ball away all game. I mean, that's about the only way. But that's something I want to see, because that builds on next week and then the week after and then the week after. That's something that I think where you can establish a good habit on defense. And so that's my number 2 key.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the disruption in the backfield will help to move to that too, right? You talk about the ability to potentially force some fumbles, like Havoc creates that, obviously, but in the passing game as well, it's Jordan Patelho, getting to a quarterback right as he's releasing the football, the ball gets knocked up in the air, or there's a tip drill, or all the different situations that can come on pressure being initiated, right? So I think that the good habits can come from other good habits as well. Like, it doesn't have to just be corners staying true to their technique and being in the proper position. It can come from defensive linemen creating pressure, defensive safety being in the proper zone and getting a tip football, and being able to take it back. So I think that Notre Dame, just in general this week, you have a bunch of guys in the back end that have the ability to create big plays. I mean, we've seen Benjamin Morrison do it. We've seen Cam Hart do it sparingly, but at times. We have seen Xavier Watts at times have the ability to be disruptive. Notre Dame, probably the biggest question mark I have on the defense right now, Brian, is the safety position. Like, that's the biggest one for me, right? So wouldn't it be great to come out this week and see Xavier Watts make some plays, see the other safety position, whether it is DJ Brown or Ramon Henderson coming in at some points, or maybe a younger guy, whoever it ends up being, right, comes in and is able to make a couple plays that you kind of go like, okay, that's moving in the right direction, right? The safety position. So I think Notre Dame has the ability to have a really good secondary this year, but I really think that it's about now taking a step forward. There were a couple missteps last week, as far as like not reading your keys properly in coverage. This week, let's remain true to your technique and let's create some big plays, man. Cam Hart, you came back for your 5th year, right? Let's create a big play. Right. Benjamin Morrison, build off of what you did as a true freshman last year. Xavier Watts, show us why everyone was so excited about you coming into this season. I think it's about that secondary stepping up and that pass defense stepping up, because there's certainly opportunities to create a lot of plays this week, because offensive line's not good. Quarterback is a little bit frantic at times. I think there's going to be chances to force him into some bad decisions this week.
Point 3, Ryan, kind of ties in with point 2, and we'll just kind of quickly get to this. Again, it goes to being smart. Don't do anything that's outside of what you're being taught to do. That doesn't mean there's a difference between trying to make a play and playing hero ball. You understand the difference. Trying to make a play is you're going up to the running back and you just try to rip it out of his hands instead of trying to tackle him and then rip it out of his hands, right?
Right.
You lose sight of what you're trying to do. You're trying to go unnecessarily force a play, which can develop bad habits, because you do that against, Mayan Williams or Travion Henderson. They're going to run you over and then, continue running into the end zone, right? Those are the things that we talk about. You do that against Ohio State, you'll see what happened last year. You try to undercut a route, you do it inappropriately, you miss, boom, 50-yard touchdown, right? So staying within structure, being smart. You can be aggressive and be sound. And that's something I thought we saw against Navy defensively. It was one of the more impressive, I thought, game plans that Notre Dame had with their front 7 against Navy in a while. And the 2021 game plan was great, but I thought the game plan was very aggressive, but also sound. It wasn't blitzing all the time, because you don't want to blitz the option. I want to see a similar philosophy here, Ryan, is look, yes, you're better than this team. I want to see an aggressive play, but aggressive within the structure of who you are, so that you can, again, do what the whole theme has been, continue to build on your success.
Well, I would like to see a little bit of creativity on the back end too, kind of going on that, right? As I talked about this already, Notre Dame does not have to rush extra defenders this week to create pressure. Like, you can rush 4 consistently and you're going to be able to create pressure into the backfield. defensively from a pass game perspective, though, I look at it and say, like, hey, man, maybe a little bit more post-snap movement, right? Rolling guys down, rolling guys up, hiding coverage, maybe doing some combos at times, depending on what looks you're seeing. I think you get a little creative on the back end, man. Force some mistakes, because then also that goes into their hand next week too, Brian, of like, against Navy, you are pretty vanilla from a defensive perspective, because it's just like it's about keys and remaining disciplined, right? Against a Tennessee State team that's more of a traditional offense, I can look at that and be like, hey, now we can start doing some different coverage variations that we want to do, a couple of different looks that we want to do, because next week when NC State, Brennan Armstrong and those cats are going to go against, now they have to think about more, right? Like they haven't just seen cover 3, cover 2, whatever. They've now seen a couple of different variations where, because I've heard people say it the other way, and I think there's some merit to it, but I disagree with it sometimes, is that when you don't show anything that you have to prepare for more. I actually disagree with that a little bit, right? When I see more, that's when I'm going to prepare for more, because now I'm like, oh man, like they're doing everything. And now I have to take time out of practice to work against cover 1 and 2-man and in 2 zone and cover 4 and some match stuff, like all the different variations that you can show. I really think that can cause a lot of confusion of what am I going to see comparatively from a game-to-game perspective.
And Ryan, if I'm just, because one of the things Marcus Freeman said to me this summer when I interviewed him is one of the adjustments they want to do is they want to do more from a disguising coverages pre-snap. So they want to be able to get into all their coverages from a lot of different looks. So especially early in the season, if I'm disguising this coverage and rolling to this and this week, and then you prepare for that, but against you, I'm going to get into those coverages differently. So I may get your quarterback thinking about, oh, I got to do this, 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 and this. And then all of a sudden I'm showing you something different this week than what I showed last week, but you spent all this time preparing on this. Now I can get you. And that's who Notre Dame is going to have to be. And so there's also this notion, and I think this is especially true on defense, Ryan, more so than offense, because on offense, your plays are what they are. You may run them out of different formations. But in modern defenses, you're going to show a lot more variation from week to week, depending on how your opponent plays. How I get to cover 2 against you is going to look different than how I get to cover 2 against this other team. Cover 2 might be a bad example. How I get into quarters, or how I get into cover 1, or how I get into some of my different combo coverages is going to look different against Tennessee State than it's going to look against NC State. But now we've put in your head that we're going to get into it this way, and you're going to be thinking about it. So I agree that I think showing more, as long as it's who you are. And again, there's always that point of diminishing returns. That's true against Tennessee State, just as true against Tennessee State as it is against Ohio State. But yes, I don't want to just line up and be vanilla and kick their butt. I mean, that's fine. I mean, there's some merit to it off defensively, more so than offensively, because it does allow you to say, hey, can we dominate with our base looks, or do we always have to fire people up? But that's more of a pass rush standpoint than it is a coverage and a structure standpoint. That's like, hey, I want more plays where I'm trusting my front 4 to get after the quarterback in this series. We may work on more of our drop 7, drop 8 on 3rd and long in this game, because I want to see if my pass rushers can win, where I may heat a team up a little bit more in future weeks. That's one thing. But when we talk about the base defense, I want to see you run your base defense. I want to see you, if you believe in disguising coverages, do it against Tennessee State and give NC State a lot to think about. That's kind of what I want to see from Notre Dame in this game. And you got to think Notre Dame's analysts are going to have a couple extra days to prepare for NC State relative to what NC State will have, because NC State plays tonight. So Notre Dame's analysts are going to be at work breaking that film down tonight and tomorrow. So that's something that could help you a little bit as well. So those are the keys, Ryan. Special teams, it's a simple one. It's in honor of the great Lou Emoji. It's do no harm. I'd love to see them break a big play, though. That's not a key. That's just something I'd like to see. They don't need to do that to win this game, but I want to see them remain aggressive on pump block team. I want to see them, because my whole thing is, if I'm aggressive on pump block, one of two things could happen. One is you've got to keep more guys in protection and they can't get downfield as quickly, which might gives me a chance to, the blockers I do have, to maybe get a block or two for Chris Tyree. Number two, you may line drive one. And if Chris Tyree can catch a punt and kind of get going, and we may see something. But The other thing is, like, when you get chances to put points on the board as if your field goal operation, you got to put points on the board. You need to be disciplined. Again, don't develop bad habits. But I'd remain aggressive in this game on special teams. I would not take a step back. And it's a similar thing we said on the other side of the ball. Both sides of the ball, really.
And I don't want to see Bryce McPherson in this game. Bryce, love you, man. Love the scholarship. Just do your thing on the sideline, brother.
Could you imagine if Bryce McPherson goes into the third game of the year and we've yet to see him play because
I really hope that happens, man. I really hope it happens. Yeah.
That'd be pretty fun. I'm not gonna lie to you. That'd be really fun. So, Ryan, those are the keys to the game. We're going to get into our predictions next, but I wanted to thank you all very much for enjoying that. Hey, do us a favor, folks. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, share this podcast. We are about 70 people away, Ryan, from 15,000 subscribers in the podcast. So if you're listening and you have not subscribed, do so now. Help us get over that 15,000 mark. We're really, really close. Vince sent me something the other day, and I believe it was like from 2021. I believe I'd have to find the thing that he sent me, but it was basically the number of subscribers we had when we first started doing this. And I think the number was like, I'm actually going to try and find it now. The number was something like 300, something like that. And it was like 2-3 years ago. I think it was like 2020, early 2020, actually. Or no, it was early 2021 because it was after the 2021 season or 2020 season. And the growth has been awesome. We thank you all very much for that. But we want to get to 15,000. So if you're listening, do us a solid. And you're not subscribed, do us a solid and subscribe. We would greatly appreciate that. So let's dive, Ryan, into our prediction show. We're going to follow the same format. We're going to make a score prediction, talk about how we think the game is going to play out, and then we'll get into some game balls, predicted game balls, and then talk about what we think the key storylines. Do you remember what I forget what our predictions were for game balls last week? I think we both said Sam Hartman, but yes. I don't remember defensively. I thought you.
I think I said Riley Mills. I think I said Riley Mills last week. Yeah,
I thought I might have said a linebacker. I have to go back and listen. So yeah, we'll have to see. But one thing that we both agreed on is that I doubt it's going to be a guy like Maris Luafau because this isn't really a Maris type of game. And
it was a Maris type of game.
It was a Maris type of game. That was great to see, and it was great to see that, and great to see how well he played. So we'll hand out some game balls and have a little bit of fun with this, Ryan. But let's dive into our predictions. I will let you start. Let me hear your score prediction, and then how you think this game is going to play out, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that for me, I'm not trying to be overly aggressive as much this year as last year because there were a couple of predictions that came back to bite me. So like last week I did 42-10, ended up being pretty good, but at one point I had like 52-10 written down, and I kind of went back and forth on myself a little bit. Honestly, folks, I just don't think this game's going to be overly close. I just don't. I think that Notre Dame has a great opportunity for offensively to continue the momentum that they built last week against Navy at a higher volume now, because there should be a few more plays, a little bit more time on their side. We're not playing against a triple option. And defensively, I said it, and I believe this truly. I think that it's going to be very difficult for Tennessee State to get into the opponent's territory. I just don't see them scoring much, if at all. So I'm going super, super big here, Brian. 56-0 Notre Dame defeats the Tennessee State Tigers. I have a hard time seeing Tennessee State score. At most, I think it's 3 or 7 points. I don't see them scoring more than that. And I think they're just not going to they're going to have a very difficult time stopping Notre Dame. So give me Notre Dame 56-0, as disrespectful as that sounds.
No, I mean, it's really not, though. I mean, if we're being honest, it's really not. I mean, look, Tennessee State's not a great football team, and this is what teams like Notre Dame are supposed to do to FCS opponents. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I mean, we see this all the time when Bama plays these type of teams. Like we see them,
Samford and them.
Yeah, I mean, you look at last year. What's actually funny is last year Alabama beat Austin Peay 34-0. That was it.
Wow.
But if I remember correctly, wasn't Austin Peay kind of good last year?
Nah, they were better the year before. I think they were actually
Okay.
kind of average last year, if I remember correctly.
I'm trying to look and see what their record was. They were 7-4, so not as
Yeah,
good. And then 2 of their losses were to Power 5 teams. So they lost Division 1 teams. They lost to Western Kentucky by 11. Lost to Jacksonville State, who's now a Power 5 or group of FBS team, and then they lost to Alabama. But they're way better than Tennessee State is kind of the point that we're getting at here when we look at this particular matchup. And so, yes, this should be a game that Notre Dame dominates. I mean, you look at what Alabama did to like Louisiana Monroe last year and won 63-7. And that's kind of what you expect. They beat, the year before they beat, New Mexico State 59-3. You look at what Notre Dame did to New Mexico back in 2019, beat them 66-14, beat Bowling Green that year 59-0. I mean, those are FBS teams. So yeah, you should dominate a team like that. I have it 62-7. I see Notre Dame scoring 8 touchdowns and a couple field goals. I think they'll have one field goal from the first group and they'll have a field goal from the second group, and that's how I see it. I think they're going. That's a lot of possessions for this kind of a game now, Ryan. With with the opponent being sort of not a good opponent. You know what I mean? You're going to have more possessions than you should with the new clock rules, is what I'm trying to say. But I still think that Notre Dame's going to have a lot more big plays in this game. So they're going to have a lot of minute and a half drives and even some of the drives that take more than a play. It'll be a lot more like that. What was it? That third scoring drive from Notre Dame against Navy, where it was like 4 plays and they didn't get to a second down. They never got to second down. I think we'll see more drives like that. And even if they do run it more, you're going to see, I hope that we see more longer chunk runs against this team. So I expect them to kind of score pretty quickly at times. And I expect the second team to put a couple scores on the board as well. I think the touchdown is going to come against the backups in the second half. I think there's going to be some sort of blown coverage or blown assignment that allows a big play that sets up a touchdown. So I do think Tennessee State gets on the board, but it wouldn't shock me, Ryan, if it's shut out. It wouldn't. But I just think there's going to be a lot of snaps with the second unit in this game, even maybe the third unit, and we may see a play given up. I hope not. I'd love to see a shutout. Could you imagine if Notre Dame's gives up 3 points through the first 2 games? I'm going to have to actually do some research and find out when the last time they gave up that few points in back-to-back games. I actually think it might have happened in Marcus Freeman's first year. I mean, his only year as the defensive coordinator. I actually now have to look at that real quick. I may be missing a game. Yeah, the Virginia and Georgia Tech. Actually, in 2021, they gave up 3 points to Virginia and 0 points to Georgia Tech. So it doesn't happen often. You'd like to see this team start that way, because here's the interesting thing, Ryan, is Notre Dame has finished that way on defense in the past, where the defense finishes the year really strong. They eventually get going. You look at Marcus Freeman's last year or first year as defensive coordinator. They gave up in November, they gave up 6, 3, 0, and 14 points. They got off to a bit of a rough start, 38 against Florida State, 29 against Toledo, 29 against Virginia Tech. Well, they gave up a pick 6, but 24 to Cincinnati, 34 to North Carolina. They finished strong, but they didn't start strong that season. I'd love to see them get off to a strong start. That would be great, in my opinion.
1.5 points per game given up is going to win you a lot of football games.
Yes. Yes, holding teams to 3 or 0 points will make you very hard to beat. There's no doubt. How I see the game playing out, Ryan, as I mentioned before, I do think Notre Dame is going to hit more big plays. I do think we're going to see some turnovers forced. I think Tennessee State knows they're going to have to try and throw the football. I'd be shocked if they're just going to try to run the ball and get out of this game as quickly as possible. I think they're going to at least try to take some shots. At least they should. And if they do just try to run the football, then they're going to be going 3 and out a lot. I just don't. I'd be shocked if Notre Dame gets run on by Tennessee State. Very, very shocked. I think their best chance in on offense is to try to do some things throwing the football. They actually do have some decent athletes on the perimeter. I really think that they do, and make Notre Dame secondary tackle in space. Because what's the one thing that was a question mark last year that remains a question mark this year, Ryan? The ability of your skill players to tackle in space, especially your safeties. Why would you not try to do things to get those safeties in space in this game? If I see DJ Brown in the film, like, is there a way we can figure out how to get this guy in space? Those are things that I would do. Make those guys beat you in that regard, and that's something I expect Tennessee to do. But I just think it's going to be hard for them to consistently move the chains, and I expect a lot of quick possessions in this game from Tennessee State. Let's hand out some game balls, Ryan. When you look at this offensively, who do you see as being the star of this game?
Well, I think that it's twofold. I think for me, I expect Sam Hartman to have a big game, but I'm actually going to go game ball to Jeremiah Love. I don't know why, but this just feels like a Jeremiah Love kind of game, where it's like Aldrich's going to be Aldrich, Jerron Payne's going to have a good game. I feel like all the running backs are going to see a little bit of what we did last week, as far as all the running backs are going to have a little bit of some really nice traction and some nice moments. But I wouldn't be shocked if Jeremiah Love leaves his football game with like 10 carries for 120 yards and like 2 touchdowns. Like, I wouldn't be shocked at all, because he's running the ball a little bit more and he bangs one for like 60, 70 yards for a big score. So I'm going to go off the rails a little bit. I'm going to pick Jeremiah Love as my game ball offensively.
Well, you're not saying something that we haven't seen before either, Ryan. You just immediately got flashbacks. What's one of the running backs that he reminds us of? CJ Prosise and Josh Adams, right? Remember Josh's first year before he took over as the starter when CJ got hurt. He came in against UMass when the game was kind of out of hand and then went off, had like a 70-yard touchdown run. He ended up having 13 carries for 133 yards that game. Very similar to the stat line that you're talking about from Jeremiah Love. And I could see him even early in the game ripping one off for like 60 when the starters are still in the game. Sure. And then the bulk comes in the second half. I could see something like that. I would love to see him and Jadarian Price just rotating in the second half. Just saying, have fun handling the speed of these two guys. That'd be a lot of fun to see. Ryan, I'm actually going to go with Tobias Merriweather. I think this is going to be a breakout game for Tobias Merriweather. This is just a guess. Again, I just have a feeling that the staff is going to say, we got to get 5 going. And I think it's going to result in some big plays. That might be more wishful thinking than a prediction, just because I know they need that. So I could see that. And I could also, but that's also the reason I could see it being like a tight end, Mitchell Evans or Holden States, because they may say, hey, look, let's do some things to get the tight ends going early in the game. And, one of those guys has like a couple touchdowns or something like that. But the other part too is it could be challenging to have a player of the game because of how well Sam Hartman spreads the ball around.
Sure.
And so I'm going to go with somebody catching it. I think the guy with the most impressive stat line is going to be Sam Hartman. It's going to be another high percentage, high yards per attempt, a lot of touchdowns. I think if they're as aggressive as we hope that they're going to be, we'll find out if that's the case. But I want to go with one of the skill players, one of the standout skill players. So that's kind of what I want to see in this game. Defensively, Mr. Roberts, who gets your game ball?
Jordan Botelho, he's my guy this week. I think that he had a very underratedly good football game against Navy. Yes. He did a lot of the dirty work. He also had that big pressure that kind of forced a little bit of an errant throw on the ball where DJ Brown got smoked on down the field that Clarence Lewis had to kind of work back and help to break up a little bit down the field. I think that this is a game where Tennessee State's not going to be able to run the ball incredibly well, and they're going to be forced to pass the football a ton. And I think that Jordan Botelho is just going to eat any opposing offensive line that he goes against alive. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Jordan Botelho plays 25 snaps in this football game and he has 3 sacks. I wouldn't be shocked at all, because I think it's that type of football game, and he's that type of talent when he's got his head on right. And it appears so far that he's got his head on right, and I think that he's going to have a big football game.
Well, one game, in my opinion, does not mean you have your head on right. And this is where let me see if I read you correctly, Ryan, if I know you as well as I think you do. It's not just that game. We saw Jordan finish the season strong, and not just in the bowl game. Even as a rotation, he had a really good game against Syracuse, had a really good game against Boston College. I mean, we saw him start to string together some performances late in the season. Then he has the bowl game. Now we see him having a good fall camp. We haven't heard his name mentioned for any other reasons than football. And then he comes out against Navy, and it's very similar to the Mara situation. That's not really a Jordan Botelho game based on who he's been in the past. The flashy, kind of make an impact kind of play. He was disciplined. He was aggressive. He played within structure, and then within structure made a lot of plays. That was a great sign. I like that one, Ryan. That was going to be my pick, so I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to say if it's not Patelho, I'm going to go with an interior guy. I'm going to go with a guy that maybe isn't a starter. I'm going to go with like a Josh Burnham, who may have a couple sacks when Tennessee State's forced to pass. A Jason Onye, some young D lineman that hasn't played a ton that just comes out and balls out. That's where I'm going to go with. If it's not Patelho, you know who else I could see having a really big game against this team, Ryan? From a sack standpoint, I could see Javonte Jean-Baptiste going off a bit in this game. His length is going to give them problems, and I was impressed by his athleticism against Navy. He played better in that game than I thought he would. I didn't think we'd see much of Javonte Jean-Baptiste against Navy because he's more of a pass rusher first guy. I thought he was very good playing the option last week, much better than I anticipated. I could see him being a guy also that could maybe be in that conversation. But my number one pick is the same as yours. I see this as and Jordan's kind of guy that will be smart enough. I mean, he's just got a knack as a football player. That was never a question. It was more about will he be focused. But Jordan's the kind of guy that you saw in high school. He understands I'm coming around the edge, unblocked, and that quarterback's right here. I'm coming down. I'm going for the strip. I could see him having a play like that as well in this game, Ryan. So I think that was a really good pick. How about special teams? Who's going to be your special teams guy? This will be a fun one.
Spencer Schrader has a big bounce back week this week. He's kicking the balls completely out of the end zone on every kickoff. He's nailing every extra point. If he gets a field goal attempt, he's going to nail it this week, man. A little bit of redemption from his missed field goal last week.
I'm going to go Chris Tyree. I think he's going to break one back. And now I know that they went with him last week. You know what? No, actually, I'm going to take that back. I'm going to go Devin Ford. I think Devin Ford's going to rip off a couple returns, maybe not for scores, but get a couple good chunk returns to give the offense a shorter field. That's where I'm going to go with on that one. I like that one. Before we move on to the mailbag, Ryan, we did the Notre Dame prediction. I'd like to kind of talk about a couple other predictions. I was able to discuss some of these games yesterday, so I don't need to dive into them again, but I did want to kind of give you a chance to get into some of these games. And tonight especially, Ryan, there's going to be 3 really good football games on tonight. And the first one is Minnesota and Nebraska. What are your thoughts on that game? You can give a prediction if you want. This isn't one of the games that we're making predictions for, but what are your thoughts? I'm very curious to see how Minnesota is this year without the offensive players they lost. Love Joe Rossi, but I think their offense could struggle. And who knows what Matt Rule's first team is going to look like. I mean, this is a very intriguing game in my opinion.
I'm going to take Minnesota in this one, but I think that Nebraska is going to keep it close, and you're going to kind of see the signs that Matt Rule is going to get this thing rolling a little bit. I think maybe you'll see a couple nice plays from Jeff Sims showing his athleticism. I think that the defense will be a little bit faster, play a little bit looser, but I just think that Minnesota, although they're dealing with some turmoil this offseason, and they're replacing Tanner Morgan at quarterback and Muhammad Ibrahim, I just think that the consistency factor that they've had as far as just from year in and year out, they've been a pretty decent football team for the last few years. Like they're winning 9+ games seemingly every year outside of a COVID year over the last couple years. So I just think the consistency factor is going to play in Minnesota's favor. I'm not really sure exactly what the score is going to be, but I think it's going to be a close football game because I think Nebraska has some better athletes as far as what they had last year. I think they're going to keep it a little bit close, but I think Minnesota takes it just because they just have a little bit more consistent approach.
And they're at home. I don't think Minnesota covers the 7-point spread, to your point.
That is a big
I could actually see Nebraska winning this game outright.
Possible.
I don't know enough about them to be able to predict that. And I'm not a fan of Minnesota's offense. It's been very underwhelming the last couple of years. They haven't really been good on offense since 2019. But Joe Rossi's defense is legit. It's a very good defense. I mean, Nebraska's defense could play very well in this game and still lose, just like last year when they lost to Minnesota 20-13 at home.
Yeah. So I think it's gonna be an ugly game. I mean, if I had to put a score on it, I would say like 20-14 or something like that. Like it's gonna be a low scoring game.
21-17, something like that. Yep. I agree. How about there's 2 Notre Dame opponents play tonight. Wake Forest plays Elon. Don't need to spend time on that. But this NC State at UConn game looks a little bit more interesting after last season than maybe we would have assumed based on how bad UConn was for quite some time. You got to give credit to Jim Mora, right? I mean, he's gotten UConn, Ryan, playing good football very quickly. Now, their offense still stinks. but their defense got pretty good last year. Beat Boston College 13-3, beat UMass, beat Liberty. Um, he beat Fresno last season when Fresno was ranked. He's done some really nice things there. I just, for me, I don't think that he just has the horses at the end of the day to run with.
Yeah.
To run with what I think is going to be a good NC State football team, but it's going to be an interesting matchup.
It is. I think that for me, I think UConn's going to keep this one close for a while, and then I agree with you. I think NC State's just going to kind of out athlete them in certain spots to just not be able to keep touch, because I think UConn's actually has some pretty underrated defensive players, man. They got Eric Watts at defensive end, who's a good football player. Jackson Mitchell's a highly productive inside linebacker, and then they got Malik Dixon Williams at safety, who's a really good football player. So I think that the combination early of really underrated defense from UConn on top of Robert and I is going to be a really good offensive coordinator for NC State, I think, in the long run. But I think that there's a little bit of a maturation that needs to happen early on in the game, right? They're going to be, still getting in rhythm, first game action with Brendan Armstrong. Yep. I think it's going to be a little bit slow early on, but then at the end of the game, NC State's just going to be a little bit too much. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is just a 2-score game at the end of it. Like if this is a 35-21 type of football game or 35-17, something like that, I wouldn't be totally shocked. But I think NC State does pull away because they just have better athletes.
Yeah, the spread is 14. I would agree with you, Ryan. I could see if NC State does cover the spread, it'll be a second half cover. It'll be because they put 17 on the board in the fourth quarter, something like that. I agree with you on that. Somebody asked, Andrew Gilmore asked, what should we be watching for NC State? Ryan talked about it. It's how quickly can their offense gel. You've got a new offensive coordinator, new quarterback, some new players in some key spots, a couple new offensive linemen. It's going to be how quickly they gel. That's going to be the thing. The defense is returning a lot of players, same coach, same system. Even the guys stepping into starting lineups or guys that have played a little bit of football, they return some really good corners. It's going to be how quickly the offense gets rolling. That's going to be a big question. And this will be a good test for them. Like you said, Ryan, UConn's going to be scrappy on defense. So it'll be a good test for them. Then the other big game tonight is Florida-Utah. This is Cameron Rising is probably not going to play, according to Pete Thamel. Is probably not going to play this weekend. I've shared my thoughts on it, Ryan. We had our predictions out earlier today. When you found out Cameron Rising didn't play, I think all you did was actually that was somebody else. Andrew McDonough did that. He basically just lowered Utah's points, but he didn't change Florida's. So you have the Utes winning, Ryan. What are you seeing from this game?
Yeah, I ended up not changing anything because at the end of the day, I think that Utah is still going to win this football game against Florida, right? So I originally had a 31-17. Could you talk me down to that now being 27-17 or, 24-17 even? Like, sure, we can get there because obviously there's a difference between Cam Rising and the Bryson Barnes, I think, is the quarterback that's playing tonight, right? I think is his name. So former walk-on. So there's obviously a difference there. But at the end of the day, I thought that Utah coming into this season wasn't going to be a great passing team anyway. Like, I think that they're going to rely on their running game. Jaquindon Jackson, former Texas quarterback, I think is going to be a breakout star at running back this year in the Pac-12. So I think that they're going to rely on him a ton. The quarterback stepping in, Bryson Barnes, he actually ran the ball decently last year in the spot that he had as well. So I think they're going to be able to control the line of scrimmage a little bit. I think they're going to run the football. They actually have a pretty dang good offensive line coming back in general, especially on the interior. So I think that they're going to be able to control the line of scrimmage a little bit against Florida. I can't trust Graham Mertz, man. Like you can't talk me into them scoring more than 17 or 20 points against Utah with Graham Mertz at quarterback. Like, you just can't do it. What people missed about last year is, although Anthony Richardson was incredibly inconsistent for Florida from game-to-game perspective, when they were good, it was because he was playing really good and being dynamic.
The win over Utah was a perfect example, Ryan. He wasn't very good throwing the ball that game. He made money throws, but he ran for 100 yards and had 3 touchdowns.
Right. And
so we'll see. I actually have Florida winning this game, Ryan. Not that I think Graham Mertz is going to play well. I think he's a better fit for this system. I just don't think he's an under center, play action, long developing read kind of guy. But what it comes down to for me is it's the perimeter matchup. I've never liked Utah's secondary the last couple of years outside of Clark Phillips. He's not there. So that's a problem area for me. And I just think that, look, to speak to your point, though, by the way, Ryan, about Jaquindon Jackson, in the last 3 games of last year, when he stepped in for some injured players, he had 303 yards in the last 3 games.
Yep.
6 touchdowns in the last 3 games, and that includes 105 yards and 2 touchdowns against USC in the Pac-12 title game. He also averaged 8.4 yards per carry on 36 carries against Colorado, USC, and Penn State in the Rose Bowl.
Yep.
So to your point, you're not just predicting a guy that's athletic that we've never seen really play before. You've seen it. I mean, if he can build on that, to your point, if he can build on what he did last season, I don't expect him to run for 8.4 yards per carry. I mean, but he's a guy that could have a chance to be one of the best running backs in the Pac-12. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. So I like that projection. I just think here's the other thing for me, Ryan. Utah has just not been a very good football team out of their league. Since going back to 20, I believe 18, they're 4-7 against FBS teams out of conference. They beat actually, I have it up here in this article. They beat BYU twice, and they beat, I think it was like Northern Illinois twice. That's it. They just haven't been good out of conference. They've been really good in their league, but just haven't been good out of conference. They have a bowl loss to like Northwestern. Like they just have not been good out of conference for some reason. But so I think Florida wins in a close game. I actually like Florida's second or receivers. They do. They had a couple freshmen that played last year. They're going to be playing now. Eugene Wilson's a really talented freshman along with Mike Pearsall. So I actually think the weapons are going to be a little bit better this year. All Graham Mertz just has to do is just be decent, and they'll be pretty good. Let's go to the Saturday games, Ryan. Unless you're dead set on talking about some of these upcoming Friday games. Let's see here. What are the Friday games for this week? You've got Louisville, Georgia Tech. If you want to talk about that, otherwise we can move on to the Saturday games, Ryan.
I think I'm good.
Okay, that's what I thought. Saturday, Ryan, I'm very curious what your thoughts are on Ohio State and Indiana. Not so much about whether or not Indiana can win the game, but kind of what you're looking for from the Buckeyes.
I don't think I'm going to get anything out of this game, honestly. That's going to tell me anything about Ohio State. I just think this is going to be one of the worst Indiana teams that we've seen in the last few years, and that's counting last year where they were very bad. I mean, they just keep losing football players, man. Like, guys keep transferring. I know they have a transfer quarterback that was at Tennessee last year as a freshman that apparently they're pretty excited about.
I'm not a big fan of him.
Traven Jackson or something like that.
I saw him in high school, Ryan, really inconsistent. Like I'm watching him at a camp in Columbus a couple years ago. I was there to watch Dante Moore and some Notre Dame players, and he's throwing seam routes like 8 feet over people's heads on air. Like really athletic kid, but very inconsistent quarterback. I do not see him. No, I don't see him being the answer. He was highly ranked, but I just don't see it with him. I could be wrong, but I don't see it.
They're just void of talent. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, could the quarterback come out and have a great game, whose name's escaped me for some reason, the kid from St. Joe's Prep in Philly? I don't know what, McCord. Could Kyle McCord come out and have a nice game against Indiana? For sure. Yeah. But is that going to tell me if Kyle McCord is going to be the guy this year at Ohio State? Also don't know, right? Because Indiana just doesn't have guys, man. Right. Like they're one of those rosters where you have to dig deep and do a lot of research on, because it's like there's not a lot coming back that's good. I mean, it just really isn't. So I think that Ohio State's just going to roll Indiana. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the game's like 49-10, 49-17. I just think that Indiana's a bad football team, and I think Ohio State is just going to out-athlete them at basically every position. I don't think we're going to learn much about Ohio State this week.
I want to see how the offensive line plays. That's what I want to see, because Indiana's going to try to heat them up, and that's going to be a completely remade offensive line. That's my big takeaway from the game. But Kyle McCord's a guy we've seen start before, Ryan. I mean, this isn't like this is the first time this kid's ever started a game. He started a game before for Ohio State, and I think threw for like 4 touchdowns in that game. And that was against Akron. Akron's not that much worse than Indiana. They're really, and I feel bad because Tom Allen seems like a great guy, and the players seem to love him, but they have no talent.
They just don't have any talent.
They just don't. Yeah. They just really don't have players.
They're one of those schools that with NIL the way it is now, like Indiana can't compete against anyone for players right now. Like you can't keep anybody in. Why would anybody want to go up to play at the University of Indiana when there's so many other schools that can offer so much more? I mean, it's tough situation for them right now.
Let's talk number 1 North Carolina versus actually an unranked South Carolina, Ryan, in a matchup of the Carolina schools. Game's going to be played in Charlotte. What are your thoughts on this game, and what is your prediction? I know we're going to actually put our predictions for this game out tomorrow, but if you want, you can go ahead and share it now.
Yeah, I think this one's going to be a really high scoring game. I know that I've been hearing all offseason about how the North Carolina defense is going to be way improved. Second year under Gene Chizik, they played decent down the stretch. I just don't think that they're good. I just still don't think they have the horses, man. They lost basically their entire secondary this offseason as well. Like
Ryan, they could
Jody
be
Grimes
improved
and
and give up
Cameron
26
Kelly.
points a game,
Right.
right? I
Yeah.
mean,
And I kind of like a little bit of what Shane Beamer's doing at South Carolina. I think he's gonna have a tough time consistently keeping everyone there because of some reasons, right? But I really think that they are a tough team and they're a pretty well coached team for the most part. I mean, like special teams wise, they're fantastic. I thought
sure.
defensively down the stretch, they got depleted because guys are like opting out and stuff. And I'm still like, they're still playing hard. They're still in the right spot. They just are missing talent there, right? Zach Pickens and Cam Smith and those types of guys opting out. It's like you
They
didn't
opted
have
out
a
for the bowl
great
game,
talent.
though, right? Did they opt out in
Yeah.
the regular season?
Yep.
Because like I broke this down actually earlier. Because one of the things about this matchup that I hear a lot from people that are kind of going towards South Carolina is, well, North Carolina's defense is really bad. It was.
Yep.
But my thing is, North Carolina gave up 30.8 points per game last year. South Carolina gave up 28.8 points per game last year. In the last 7 games of the year, South Carolina gave up more points than North Carolina did. And I would argue that, yes, North Carolina lost their entire secondary. So did South Carolina, basically. Now,
Well, they got the
I think the
Dial
guys
kid
they have coming back are
Marcellus
good
Dial.
are talented players, but they lost Rush.
Yeah.
They lost the other kid. They lost some really good defensive linemen. They lost Jordan Branch to transfer. So that's going to be the interesting thing. But what it comes down to for me, Ryan, is I don't trust Spencer Rattler as much as I trust Drake May. That's what it comes down to for me.
I don't think that I agree with that. I mean, yes, I definitely trust Drake May a lot more than Spencer Rattler. I just think that South Carolina just has a little bit more talent coming back. I mean, even with losing Rush and losing Cam Smith in the secondary, you still have Marcellus Dial coming back. You still have the freshman safety, Nick, however you pronounce his last name, coming back. Like there's still a lot of talent there. So I think it's going to be a high scoring game because I just think I don't like either defense, right? It's kind of my point. 42-38, I had it.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
South Carolina wins just because and UNC also, I think Drake May is going to be able to do some hero ball stuff, but he's replacing a lot of guys too. I mean, Antoine Green's gone, Josh Downs is gone. They have their tight ends coming back, but otherwise in the passing game, they have a bunch of talents, but not a ton of proven talent coming back out wide.
Well, the key is going to be they do have Nesbitt coming back, who's very good. You've got a couple guys that were freshmen last year that played well. They're going to get a lot more playing time this year. Obviously, Kobe Pacenor, Gavin Blackwell, Andre Green was a highly ranked kid. I think they're going to get back to running the ball a little bit better. And I do like the young backs that they have coming back. Obviously, Maureen Hampton, George Pettaway. I like those guys. They have some talent. The question for me for North Carolina is going to be, can their offensive line play better? And I thought their offensive line play the last 2 years was incredibly disappointing because they actually had decent players. Right? They had guys that were getting drafted, right? And they just did not play well. 2020, they played great in the run game. And then they just kind of went away from it the last 2 years. Hero ball doesn't win you a bunch of games, in my opinion.
Yeah.
To what you said earlier, they're going to need Drake May to have a better supporting cast. If the NCAA, it's kind of interesting. If they allow Tez Walker to play, I like North Carolina. If he doesn't play, then it's a little bit more iffy for me. I'll probably still lean towards North Carolina, but it's going to be a little bit more iffy because that's the kid that transferred in from
Kent State.
Kent State. Yeah, that you and I were talking about the other day. So that's going to be I agree with one thing you and I are 100% on the same page on, Ryan. That could arguably be the most entertaining game of the weekend if you're someone who loves offense.
Yep.
That there's not going to be a lot of stops in that game, in my opinion. I really don't. Let's go Sunday, Ryan. It's the big game of the weekend, and that is going to be number 5 LSU against number 8 Florida State in Orlando. Let me hear what you have to say and what's your prediction.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a great football game. I had this one 28-24 in favor of Florida State. Florida State won the game last year, but if you watch the football game, Florida State was dominating early, and then LSU had come back, obviously, in the second half. I think for me that these two teams are kind of mirror images of one another. You know, you have dual threat quarterbacks that make a lot of plays. You have improving offensive lines over the last couple years comparative to what they were. I think offensively and on both sides, you have some talent out wide with guys like Malik Neighbors on LSU side, Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson on Florida State side. I think there's a lot of and really talented defensive lines that are getting better as well. So I think that you have a lot of parallels that are interesting, a lot of similarities that are interesting. I ultimately went with Florida State in the edge because I just think that Florida State has more money players than what LSU has. I think you could even argue that LSU might have a deeper roster than what Florida State has when you get down to the twos and the threes and like the entirety of a depth chart. But I look at it and I say Jared Verse, Johnny Wilson, Keon Coleman, Jordan Travis, Trey Benson. It's a lot of dudes, man. And on LSU side, you have Jaden Daniels, you have Malik Neighbors, you have Harold Perkins. But like outside of that, I just think that Florida State has more of the money players, the dudes on the team that I think have more of an opportunity to make a couple of money plays down the stretch. So give me Florida State 28-24 over LSU in a very tight one, where I think LSU actually comes out and plays a lot better in the first half than they did last year.
Well, and some people forget about last year's game is, LSU had a chance to win it late, but that's only because Florida State fumbled the ball at the 1 yard line with a chance to completely put the game away and not even make it close. And that kind of gets dismissed. To your point, Ryan, the game was not as close as how I think LSU got outplayed in that game. I think the biggest mistake Florida State made in that game is they went away defensively from what was working for them because they had a big lead. And I think that was a mistake. I said this yesterday, Ryan. I think Florida State this last 2 years has been one of the best transfer portal teams in college football because they haven't gone for volume. They've been more than Notre Dame, but not like USC and these other teams, but they've been very targeted. And the guys they're getting veterans. They're getting guys that are proven, getting Keon Coleman, Braden Fisk, Fentrell Cypress this year. You got Johnny Wilson last year. They've been really smart about who they've went and got. Dylan Gibbons was a very underrated transfer pickup that they had the last few years from Notre Dame.
Trey Benson was a transfer
Trey
pickup
Benson
last
from
year,
Oregon.
too.
Yes, that's another one.
Yeah.
They've been very targeted with how they've gone in the portal, and they've landed guys that fit what they're doing. I mean, look, Malik Neighbors is a really good wide receiver. I just don't think that receiving core and that running back depth chart is as good at LSU as it is at Florida State. And the lines to me are similar. I think LSU has a little bit more talent. Florida State is a little bit better coached, in my opinion. But I think without Mason Smith on the defensive line, Florida State's going to have the better defensive line. And I think Fentrell Cypress is going to help solidify, because one of the big concerns I had about their defense last year is I didn't love the secondary at Florida State, especially corner. And I think Fentrell Cypress is a good football player, the kid from Virginia. So I like this Florida State team. I really do. I think it's going to be a great game, Ryan. You and I are a point off. You had 28-24 Florida State. I have 27-24 Florida State. I do think LSU will be able to force a couple field goals. And I think Harold Perkins is going to do some things in this game to help keep it close, because he's going to make some big stops and probably force a turnover. I think LSU is trending in the right direction under Brian Kelly as far as getting back from what they were before he got here. I just don't think their roster is what people make it out to be. I don't think that preseason top 5 team. It's going to look like the higher ranked team lost. They should not be ranked as high as Florida State. I mean, they just shouldn't. This is still a team that lost 4 games last year, and all of them were blowouts, except for the Florida State game. And Florida State was a fumble at the 1 yard line away from making it a blowout, in my opinion. I think they have a lot more work to do than people think. And I think the problem with them being ranked where they're ranked, Ryan, is if they battle Florida State for 4 quarters, it's going to seem like a disappointment that they lost, when in fact, I think it's a sign that they're growing as a football program. And if LSU can win this game, it's a big step in the right direction. It's a bigger win than I think people will give it credit for, because they're favored and because they're ranked higher. In my opinion, if LSU wins this game, the team that's not as talented and not as far along in a new coach's development will have won. That'd be a great sign for LSU, in my opinion. But I've got Florida State winning this game, in my opinion. And then last one, Ryan, this is, I know, one you're very interested in. That's Monday night. Clemson plays at Duke. You've already put Clemson on upset watch this weekend. What is your prediction, Ryan, and what are your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I think Clemson's going to get upset this weekend. I think that when I look at it, I think that Clemson is going to be able to score a whole lot more than what they were able to do this past year consistently on a week-to-week basis. I just think there's going to be a little bit of growing pains from first game perspective, right? You still have a kid that's going to be a first-year starting quarterback. You have Garrett Riley, who's now going to be out of the confines of coaching under Sonny Dykes. He's going to be by himself, right? So I think 31-27, Duke wins this one. I think that this is kind of the coming out party for Riley Leonard a little bit. I know that people have been talking about him. I know that he's a national name that people know now, but I think that it's really going to get rolling to a much higher level after this game. I just think Duke has a little bit more certainty coming back at a lot of spots offensively. Like you have Will Shipley coming back if you're Clemson. Antonio Williams had a good freshman year, but I mean, Duke is 3 deep at wide receiver. They have a really good offensive line coming back, Riley Leonard coming back. And I think that the defensive line and defense in general is going to have enough pieces to be able to just keep the game within distance for a guy like Riley Leonard to maybe score the last drive of the football game to potentially win the game. So 31-27, Duke in an upset over
Interesting.
Clemson.
I like it. I like it. That takes some guts to make that pick. I think it's going to be a competitive game for a while, Ryan. I just feel when I look at the matchup, I feel Clemson is good on defense in the areas where they need to be good in order to keep Duke from really going off too much in this game. I see a 31-24 game with Clemson winning 31 or 34. I see it being a 7 to 10 point game that's going to be competitive for a while. I like the weapons that Duke has. I just don't think it's going to be enough. And I don't think they're going to ask Cade Klubnik to carry the team the way that past quarterbacks have. They're going to run the football. I love this Clemson offensive line, but it's going against a very underrated Duke defensive line, in my opinion. And what's interesting is Duke had a pretty good D-line back in 2019, but they were edge players. It's Victor Demooks, and they had Chris Rump third. Now their defensive line is built more so on the inside guys with Dwayne Carter and Jamion Franklin, and they've got a pretty good rotation there. But I just think Clemson's going to have too much firepower. I think it's going to be a really fun game. And I don't think that even with my disagreement on the score, Ryan, that it's going to necessarily mean that what you said about Riley Leonard's coming out party is still going to be there, because it's going to be a Monday night game that all college football fans are going to be watching. And they're going to be like, who the heck is this kid that's putting Duke on his shoulders and keeping him in this game? So win or lose, I have a feeling this is going to be a bit of a coming out party for Riley Leonard either way. And people are going to be, and Ryan's going to be like, dude, I was talking about this last year after the first game, right? You guys are way late to the party, but they're going to still join the party. But I just think Clemson has a little bit too much firepower top to bottom. But I think this is going to be a quality Duke football team this year. I don't think what Mike Elko did last year was a fluke, Ryan. It wasn't. It wasn't smoke and mirrors. I mean, their 4 losses were by combined 16 points. That's it. Yeah. And so I really like what Mike Elko's doing. I just don't think they have enough athleticism and firepower yet to beat Duke. But I'm not going to lie. I wouldn't mind seeing your prediction being right. I'm a big Mike Elko fan, so I'd love to see that one. That'd be a lot of fun. So that's going to do it for the prediction show, Ryan. We're going to do the mailbag next, folks. But before we do, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. We actually had a couple people subscribe during the show, so we're now 68 people away from getting to 15,000 on our channel. So we would love to see you all to subscribe for that as well. And of course, if you haven't done so already, folks, sign up for the message boards at boards.irisbreakdown.com. We don't have a lot of mailbag questions, Ryan, but we do have some. I want to first super chat from Raymond Harden. Says, no question, just for support. Go Irish. Thank you, Raymond. But man, you need to be saving your super chats. You guys, I know, are still coming back from a little bit of weather damage from that hurricane down there. So, but we appreciate you very, very, very much. Let's go here, Ryan, and start off with David Lowe.
David Lowe says, I saw where Tom Loy said he thought Buckner's fall off was from outside coaches. I thought I remember y'all guys saying the same. What is your thoughts on that?
We have said that. We said there's 2 things that hurt Tyler Buckner. One, lack of playing time because of injuries and COVID. We've said that. The other is that year off, he spent time with quarterback coaches who changed his throwing motion. And I just don't think it was for the better. It's very similar to kind of some of the changes we saw from Brandon Wimbush, and I just don't think it fit him. I don't. So no, I mean, you go back and watch Tyler Buckner, the kid that we saw as a junior in 2020 and 2019. We haven't seen that kid since, in my opinion. We saw flashes of it against South Carolina. We did, but he couldn't consistently and accurately make those throws, Ryan. But he lost thousands and thousands of reps because of the injuries.
Sure.
When you look and because of COVID, he lost his whole senior year and all the reps he would have got reading defenses and all that. He lost his whole sophomore year. Well, most of his sophomore year. And I'm not just talking about like not playing, like not being a starter, but still he didn't even get a practice for most of that year. I think those are the things that have hurt him even more than that. And I think he made a poor decision. I think Tyler would have been better off, number one, staying at Notre Dame, or number two, going out west to Stanford or somewhere like that. I think that would have been a much smarter decision for Tyler. He chose to follow Tommy Rees to Alabama, and I hope it works out for him, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be starting for them this year, but we'll see. I like Tyler. I think he's a good kid, and he's had some bad luck. I just think he made a poor decision. It's fine. I respect it, and I doesn't mean I think less of him as a kid and all that, but I just think it was a bad decision, in my opinion. But yes, we've said that many times. Many times.
David Lowe also followed up, said Steve Angeli touchdowns over under 1 on Saturday. David, I hate the whole number over unders, by the way, man.
Yes.
I hate those. I want it to be
gotta be 1.5.
1.5.
It's got to be 1.5, Ryan, right? It's got to be 1.5. So do you think he's gonna be at 1, or is he gonna be at 2?
I think it's going to be a push. Like, I think that Steve's going to have 1 touchdown on Saturday. So
I'm setting it at 1.5. So you're taking the under. Now here's my follow-up question, Ryan. Do you think he leads them on more than one scoring drive?
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. I could see him having 1 touchdown pass in this football game, but whether it's Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price or whoever is the other running back that's going to get a ton of carries in the second half, if he reaches the end zone once or twice, right? Like, I just think that it's still going to be a running approach to the second half when some of those guys gets in.
Sure.
But yeah, so I'll say push it 1, under 1.5.
If he goes over, it'll be 1 pass and 1 run. He'll have a scramble or a keep or something that for the second touchdown.
Could happen.
And that would be if he goes over. But I'm with Ryan. I'm going push at 1, and I'm going under for the 1.5. But yes, guys, in the future, if you're going to make an over under pick, try setting a solid number, because it just makes it a little bit more fun that way. So we got another one from David Lowe.
And also, David, I typically, if I am betting, if I see a whole number over under, I usually just kind of keep looking, right? Because that's not going to be one that I'm going to touch. David Lowe again said, if you could pick just 3 running backs for Notre Dame current roster for a 3-headed monster, who would y'all's choices be?
So if I could take 3 running backs for the Notre Dame current roster, is he talking nationally?
No, I think he's saying if out of the 5 running backs that play for Notre Dame, if you could say, I just want a 3-headed monster, who would your 3 be?
Oh man, see that's tough, because I'm going to leave out somebody that I want to play. If everybody's playing at their peak level, it's going to be Audric, Jadarian, and Jeremiah would be my picks if they're all playing at the highest level. But fortunately for Notre Dame, they don't have to only settle at 3. They can still play Jabron Payne, and they can still use Devin Ford. But it would be Estime, Price, and Love.
It would be those 3, because I think that Audric is very different than the other 2, right? And I think that those other 2, especially if they're the complements to Audric's 1A type of conversation, then we're talking about a lot of explosive plays being created on top of Audric's just consistency of churning out yardage, right? So yeah, that would be my possibility. I like that as like backups, usually guys that can create big plays outside of my workhorse type of back.
It's got to be who can do more with less. That's what it comes down to for me.
Yep.
I'm with you, Ryan. I'm with you on that.
God Country Notre Dame Barbecue. How would the 88 Notre Dame National Championship team do in today's college football? That's a great question.
I think they'd still be very good. I mean, again, here's the problem, right? So if we're gonna talk about the 88 team and playing them today, so there's one of 2 things is true. Number one is they're a bunch of 50-year-olds, and in that regard, they're not going to play well. Or
we just teleport them here.
The other way is, well, you teleport them here. It's one way to look at it. Or you say, like, what if that team grew up in this era? There's all types of different ways to look at it. Number one is the team from back in 1988 is going to struggle with the size of the modern game. That's just the reality of it. And when you look at the size of the Notre Dame offensive line, they had a couple 270-pound starting offensive linemen. I mean, they weren't a real big football team. That's going to hurt them. And I think that probably hurt them a little bit more on offense than it would on defense, to be honest with you, because they actually had the way that they ran. But I'll say this. The one unique thing about that 1988 team, Ryan, is athletically, skill-wise, they are perfect for today's era. They would have the perfect athletes for today's era. They'd have a home run hitter in Rocket Ismail. They'd have Ricky Waters could be a dynamic slot like a Chris Tyree, but a lot taller. Or you could move him to running back, but running back like Anthony Johnson would be a lot like Audric Estime, like a fullback body, because Audric Estime in 1988 is playing fullback for Notre Dame. He's Ray Zellers. You know what I mean? He's Jerome Bettis. He's that kind of running fullback. He'd be a fullback in that system. And, you know, so Anthony Johnson would be a big tailback in the way that they are now. So I think athletically Notre Dame would stack up very well in the modern era. The question would be, well, okay, well, who's your quarterback going to be? Well, what I would say is in today's era, Tony Rice isn't a quarterback. He's a receiver for me, and he'd probably be a pretty good one. And so then you say, well, who's your starting quarterback? Well, Notre Dame had this guy on their roster in 1988 by the name of Kent Graham, who was an NFL quarterback that you might have seen play a lot more if he was if we were looking at it. So I would say, Ryan, that would be something that I would look at is Kent Graham would be your quarterback, and you'd have Tony Rice playing receiver with Rocket Ismail and Ricky Waters. That's a pretty dynamic receiving core. And you'd have Anthony Johnson, Tony Brooks, Mark Green playing running back. Derek Brown would be a modern-ish type of tight end. He was tall, fast, 6'7", fast. He'd be pretty good. They had legit NFL athletes in the secondary. Todd Light, Stance Magala was really fast. Pat Terrell was an NFL athlete. Michael Stonebreaker was an undersized, very athletic linebacker that would fit way better in today's era than he did then. And so I think in a lot of areas, Notre Dame's team would have translated very well, except for offensive line size and the quarterback, in my opinion. Other than that, there's be a lot that would translate very well to today's game.
Yeah. There'd have to be some things that you would have adapt, right? I mean, like offensive structure wise, you do things a little bit differently as well.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that athletically, they'd be able to compete in today's game. There's no doubt they'd still be able to be a very good football team. It would just be about figuring out what offense best suits if you had that undersized offensive line that you just had to pop back into 2023. So,
because you'd have one of the most explosive teams in college football, Ryan, athletically. I mean, when you talk about having Rocket Ismail and Ricky Waters and guys like that, I mean, you'd be really dynamic in that regard.
Yep.
Got a few more here. Good question.
Andrew Gilmore's question: did you hear Urban Meyer's take on Notre Dame's quarterback situation? I'm not sure how I feel about it. In any event, he comes sounding jerky, even if it's valid.
That's just his delivery method. He's just kind of he just has that demeanor. He basically said, Sam Hartman's great and everything, but Notre Dame shouldn't have to go to the transfer portal to get a quarterback. And I'm like, okay, that's fine, whatever. We've seen it. We've seen teams do it. He said Notre Dame's a team that should be recruiting quarterback better and all that kind of stuff. And my big takeaway is I don't think, like, I understand where he's coming from, and there's aspects of what he's saying that we have said. Notre Dame should not have to go to the transfer portal to get a quarterback. Sure. Okay, fine. It is what it is. They chose to do so, and it's a little different because you do have a new coaching staff taking over and that type of thing, whatever the case may be. But my point is this. Number one is no matter how well they've done recruiting quarterbacks, if they had lost a starter and you say, okay, we've got some talented young 5-stars or this proven guy who's top 20, you'd still look at a guy like him. Alabama looked at Sam Hartman. I mean, other teams have done that. Ohio State has taken transfer quarterbacks, right? I mean, the last time that Ohio State played the national championship game, they had a transfer quarterback, right? I mean, you see a guy that can play, you go get him. The issue I have is I think it's it doesn't show it shows a general knowledge of Notre Dame, but not a really detailed knowledge of Notre Dame. And I saw some Notre Dame fans on Twitter, oh, he's right. I'm like, no, he's not right. He's not right because quarterback has been a big problem at Notre Dame for years. But I will say this, and I will continue to say this, recruiting quarterbacks at Notre Dame was a recent problem. It has not been a problem for very long. You can't tell me, and no one will convince me, and you can make whatever argument say, and it'll go in one ear and out the other, because I've thought a lot about this. When you, in back-to-back years, You get Everett Golson, Garrett Gunnar Keel, Malik Zaire, Deshaun Kaiser, and Brandon Wimbush. Your problem is not recruiting quarterbacks. Your problem is developing quarterbacks. When you sign Phil Dracovic and Tyler Buckner in a 3 or 4 year period, again, recruiting quarterbacks is not your problem. Developing quarterbacks is. That's been Notre Dame's problem, Ryan. And somebody said, well, Deshaun Kaiser wasn't highly ranked. Yes, he was. He was a 4-star recruit that had offers from Alabama, LSU, Penn State, Tennessee. And he was the guy that a lot of teams are coming around on. He was actually planning on going on a bunch of visits to SEC schools, but he decided to commit to Notre Dame instead. Brandon Wimbush was ranked higher coming out of high school than Deshaun Watson was. Gunnar Keel is a 5-star quarterback. And I don't care what Everett Golson's ranking was. That was a kid that had one of the best high school arms I've ever seen. He had 144 touchdowns in his career, threw for like 12,000 yards in high school, beat Jadeveon Clowney's team in the state championship game. And then in Brian Kelly's first class, he signed Andrew Hendricks, who's a top 250 kid. He was very talented. He was just very raw. And let's not forget that when Brian Kelly got hired at Notre Dame, he inherited Dane Christ, who was a 5-star quarterback with a big arm. So talent at quarterback has not been an issue for Notre Dame for most of the last 15 years. There was a stretch there around 2016, 2017, when guess what? Brian Kelly had completely checked out, where recruiting at quarterback started to get bad. You got Avery Davis one year. You got Ian Book another year. You settled on Drew Pine when he was a sophomore, right? It got lazy. That was a problem with Brian Kelly, but like no mention of the fact that in recent years, you've gotten Kenny Minchie, you've got CJ Carr committed. They're clearly changing things around, but I just thought it was just to me a lazy take, in my opinion. I mean, when Everett Golson, Gunnar Keel, Malik Zaire, Deshaun Kaiser, and Brandon Wimbush in 5 straight classes, quarterback recruiting is not your problem. Quarterback development is your problem. And then if you to develop those guys better, it's easier to recruit in the later tenure as well. That's just the reality of it. So it was a very superficial take that Urban had, but he had real conviction about his superficial take that the end result is the same. Notre Dame should not have to go to the portal for a quarterback. And here's my thing, Ryan. If Notre Dame would have chosen to go to the portal because of how good Sam Hartman is, and they had some really good young quarterbacks, that's fine. But Notre Dame was in a position where they kind of had to go to the portal for a quarterback. And I do think there's merit to that. That's not where you want to be as a program, in my view.
Sure.
I mean, and you look at Lincoln Riley did that. Yeah, not really. I mean, first of all, when Baker Mayfield transferred to Oklahoma, nobody was like, oh, wow, from Texas Tech. No, it was, oh, wow, like Scott, future Heisman Trophy winner. The guy was a walk-on at Texas Tech. Kyler Murray transferred after his freshman year and sat out a year, like backed up Baker for a year. So it wasn't like he just came in for a year. These were guys that got through the transfer portal. The only guy that was really a 1-year transfer guy was Jalen Hurts. And that was probably Lincoln Riley's worst team of his first 3-4 years. They if it wasn't for Jalen Hurts, that team would have been in big trouble that year. But it's a little bit of a different situation in my opinion. But Alabama won a title with the transfer quarterback in 2015. I mean, it's part of the business, right? I mean, Jacob Coker transferred from Florida State. It's part of the business. Ohio State's played in the national title game with a transfer quarterback. LSU won a title with a transfer quarterback. Like, that's the reality in college football now.
I think it's kind of tone deaf to the times, to be honest. I mean, I would even go say, like, what's his most recent success as a football coach was at Ohio State, who was arguably the best quarterback that Ohio State's had in recent years. It was Justin Fields when he transferred over from Georgia. I mean, yeah, every school does it. LSU this year, Jaden Daniels. They had Joe Burrow a few years ago. You already mentioned Lincoln Riley with his string of success with transfer quarterbacks. I mean,
Bama won a title with a transfer quarterback and Jacob Coker. Exactly.
Alabama took a transfer quarterback this offseason, and we know that they were going big game hunting for trying to get a different quarterback potentially in the transfer portal. So, yeah, I mean, it's just the times. I'll say this. I watched the Swamp Kings documentary about the Florida Gators, and it just kind of solidified my thoughts on Urban Meyer. So I'll just leave it at that. So,
absolutely. Let's not also forget that I would argue that the best team that Jim Harbaugh had prior to his most recent stretch was that 2016 team that had that built off of the 2015. No, actually, it was 2016. They had a kid they committed. It was Wilton Spate, but the 2015 team that helped build a lot of that was with Jake Rudock, who was a transfer quarterback. That's what everyone's
They had
doing.
Shea Patterson too there a couple years
Oh,
ago.
that's right. He was another
yeah.
transfer. That's right.
Yep.
The 2018 team that was really good had a transfer
Yep.
quarterback. So it's part of college football. And it is what it is. So it was shallow analysis, which is what you get from a lot of the national guys. And he delivered it like a jerk, and that's just kind of what Urban does.
Urban Meyer, a jerk? No way. Andrew
Shocker.
Gilmore, did you follow Deion Sanders' latest press conference? He was not his cocky self, somewhat short with the press. Do you think he's nervous that talking season is over and now it's game time?
I didn't watch the press conference.
I didn't see it either.
To me, it's probably just more about he understands what time it is, right? And there's a time and a place to be that way. Deion's a smart guy.
Yeah.
Deion knows how to handle the media. And if Deion is acting a certain way with the press, you can guarantee that there's some sort of
reason behind it.
Yes, exactly, Ryan. Like we talk a lot. People talk a lot about how Deion carries himself. Deion is very strategic with the things that he does. Yes, he's very ego-driven. So are a lot of coaches. Deion just handles it a little bit differently, and that's what works for him. If he wasn't that way, he wouldn't be having the success that he's had, right?
Yeah,
so
players wouldn't be as infatuated with him if it wasn't like that. To your point,
and this whole time he's not talking about how we're going to go out there and kick TCU's butt. It's not. It's I'm trying to build something here. I'm trying to get these kids to believe in themselves and what they're doing and do things a certain way. So if he is more reserved, it's because he's smart and it's getting closer to your point. It's getting closer to the season. And so Deion, whatever he's doing, I promise you it's strategic. Deion is there's not a coach in the country that's had more microphones shoved in his face for the last 30 years than Deion Sanders. Okay. And because we're going back to his playing days. So I would imagine that there's a reason for it, Ryan, that's built around the message he wants his team to hear.
And Colorado covers that 20.5 this week, buddy.
You think so?
Yeah.
I hope. I wouldn't be. I've said this. I want Deion to be successful. The more teams that are good, the better it is for college football.
Yeah, I don't think it's gonna be like a super competitive game, but I just think when you
get like a late score,
TCU
maybe.
Breaking in new quarterback, offensive coordinator change, best wide receiver gone, best running back gone, a couple good defensive players gone, combined with Colorado just being a better roster than they were last year. I'd be surprised if it wasn't at least. If it was, I don't think it's going to be like a landslide, is kind of what I'm saying, right? Like a 17-point victory or something like that, comparative to last year, man, if you guys want some hilarious schedule look, go look at Colorado's schedule last year, dude. It was pathetic. I mean, they lost I think it was like 41-10 to Air Force last year. It was embarrassing, man. Embarrassing schedule. Yeah. That's like every game too. Every game was like 40-something to 10, 47 to 13. Yeah. It was just it was wild, man. Wild.
They weren't even. I pointed this out I actually went through it the other day, Ryan, and pointed out their record. I mean, they weren't even. Not only did they lose a bunch of games, but they weren't even competitive in games. I mean, they just
literally the only competitive game they had last year was their close win over Cal. Yeah. That was the only one. So.
It was. I think they had one other game that was within 8 or something like that, like Arizona State. Or something like that. Let me go look that up.
It sounds right.
But yeah, it was an 8-point home loss to Arizona State. But if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong on this, but if I remember correctly, it wasn't quite that close. Let me just go look at it real quick, Ryan. It wasn't. Yeah, Colorado scored the last 2 touchdowns of the game in the fourth quarter. It was 42-20 at one point in time. So I was correct. And they had and their last score with 3 minutes left was an 88-yard punt return for a touchdown. So it was not even that game wasn't that competitive, Ryan.
That was one of the worst teams I've
Arizona State outgained Colorado by just 2 yards under 200. It's 198 yards. They outgained them by last year. So yeah, it wasn't a competitive team. No. And they've gotten some good players, but not to the way that people make it out to be. Their roster now is on this competitive level with these other people. It's still not. It really isn't.
No depth for sure.
Yep. I just saw somebody say in the chat that Joe Burrow was the greatest college quarterback ever. No, he wasn't.
Maybe had the greatest
he
season ever.
might have had the greatest season ever. But even then, we've seen some other pretty great individual seasons. I mean, Sam Bradford back in the year he won the Heisman Trophy was a pretty darn good quarterback as well, and they were a little bit ahead of their time. But Joe Burrow was phenomenal, and I would say it's certainly in the conversation for greatest individual season ever. But I think we need to pump the brakes on just flat out saying he was the greatest quarterback ever. I mean, his senior, well, technically his junior year at LSU was mediocre. He was 2,894 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 5 picks. Like, those are Drew Pine numbers, to be honest with you. But yeah, his one season was special.
Stupid.
It was special.
It was dumb.
Right. Anyone that's put
60
him or Cam
touchdowns.
Hart in the greatest quarterbacks of all time conversation, I don't buy that. You want to talk about greatest individual seasons? Sure, we can have that conversation. But
Wait, who'd
you've
you
got to
say?
do it from, huh?
Who did you say?
I said anyone that's going to put him and Cam Newton in like the
I think you said
greatest.
Cam Hart. Got it.
I might have
Yeah.
said Cam Hart.
Gotcha.
Cam Newton conversation for greatest quarterbacks ever are misguided. You can't just be a 1-year wonder in order to be in that conversation, in my opinion. And to me, it also misses the mark when you're just stats driven, because I don't care what the stats say. Vince Young his 2005 season was one of the greatest seasons ever, but Vince Young did it for multiple seasons at Texas. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's just, yeah. If I could say who you taking for 1 year, Cam Newton or Vince Young, that's a tough decision. If I say who am I taking for a 4-year career based on what we know, it's Vince Young, because he did it for more than a year. So interesting conversation. Last couple questions here, Ryan.
JHT 1988 says, fully acknowledge overall Sam Hartman was great, but do you believe from a throwing perspective he has the ability to be more accurate and crisp as they gel more?
Of course. I mean, as they gel more, he'll make the throw different to Tobias. He won't stare down Chris Tyree on that option route that almost got picked off. He'll be a little bit sharper on some of the out throws, which were thrown, with on a wet field. That was part of it too. I mean, you would hope that a quarterback hasn't peaked in game one, Ryan.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, even that throw, although very late to Chris Tyree, and that almost got picked, that ball still hit him in the hands. You know,
got tipped, but yeah, it did. It hit him in the hands, right? But a better corner, a better defender makes that play. Sure. And the point I made is I'm not trying to poo-poo the job Sam Hartman did, because he did a phenomenal job, and it was beyond just the stats. It was the calm. It was the presence he brought. But let's not forget that last year Notre Dame threw for even more yards and also had 4 touchdown passes against Navy. They had 35 points in the first half against Navy last year. So that's why I say it's a great start, but you've got to build on it now as you face tougher opponents. And I would argue that this week is going to be a tougher test for the receivers in the pass game than last week was. I mean, They have good athletes in secondary, and Tennessee State had one of the best pass defenses in the country last year. They ranked in the top 20 in total yards. They ranked in the top 10 in yards allowed per attempt, if I remember correctly from the stats we put up the other day. So, yeah, this is going to be a better test than it was last week. But then next week is really the big test of what they're going to do. And it's against a defense that Sam Hartman has struggled with in the past with turnovers. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing that game. Absolutely.
I think that this game against Bryce Phillips, especially at corner, is going to be a good test to go up against Shaheem Battle and Aiden White the next week, right?
Yeah.
Like Navy to that is a chasm. Bryce Phillips to that, we're in the ballpark now. Like, you're going to see a 6'1", 195-pound corner that's extremely talented that would not be playing at Tennessee State if he was not a COVID kid the senior season. He would not be here. So I think Tobias Merriweather is not going to be able to just get out of bed, and just kind of go along with the motions and beat Bryce Phillips consistently on that day. Like, he's going to have to come out. He's going to have to play ball. So it's going to be a good test in that regard.
And the other corner, as you mentioned, Ryan, he's a 6 foot, 190-pound kid. Their number 3 corner, the Watkins kid who transferred from Memphis, he's 6'4", 215, right? So, I mean, it's not like they're going against these little tiny, like when I was coaching the Division III level, the best corners we ever faced were these really short kids that were freaky athletes, but they were at Division III level because they were 5'6", 5'7".
Sure.
I've said this about a kid that I coach at Christopher Newport, a kid named Rob Rodriguez. He got a tryout with the Kansas City Chiefs. He was 5'6", 155 pounds. Just an insane athlete, an insane football player, but there's no way any team's going to give him a scholarship. And that's what he was as a senior in college. What do you think he was in high school? That's not the case in this situation. Like you said, with Tennessee State, is these are legit like Power 5 sized cornerbacks that are also pretty good football players. The rest of their team is, to me, FCS guys.
Yeah.
But their corners are guys that could play at the Division I level, in my opinion, especially like you said, Ryan, Bryce Phillips.
Yep. A T Guns. What's up, Tommy? Over under 0.5 sacks against # Sammy Heisman only.
I'm going
Over.
I'm gonna take the over. I could see something like where he's running around and somebody blows a coverage on the first or second down and he gets sacked. Yeah, I'll take the over on that.
That also counts of if a second team or even a third team gets in as well, right? Is there like a miscommunication with the offensive protection? Like,
although I don't see Sam Hartman being in the game when they're putting those guys in.
Oh, against Sammy. I'm sorry, I misread that. Yeah.
Sorry, I've done that a lot lately.
I'll still say over though, Tommy.
Yeah,
but it's a more difficult one in that situation.
Yep.
Tyler Evans with the super chat. Thank you, Tyler. What was your favorite college football season of all time?
In 1988. I mean, I have two, 88 and 05. 05 was a great season. I mean, it's just a great season. Yeah, it was great for Notre Dame, and you had the bounce back, and you had the great game against Michigan State, the great game against USC, but that's just a great season of college football. I remember the Ohio State-Penn State game that year. Texas and Ohio State played that year, or in the first game of the year, a game that Ohio State had plenty of chances to win. USC, this the freaky side. I still remember watching the Fresno State game, Ryan. I watched it that night, and I'm just thinking, like, this guy is one of the most insane players I've ever seen. Yeah. The 88 season to me also was huge because not only did Notre Dame win a title that year, but that was one of the greatest Heisman seasons ever. Barry Sanders was insane that season. Like,
for like 2,600 yards or something like that.
In 11 games, Ryan. I mean, that's and he had multiple. I'm gonna read you his stats. Like, Barry Sanders that season was just insanely good. But Barry Sanders that season in 11 games rushed for 2,628 yards and 37 touchdowns for 7.6 yards per carry. That's rushing. He also averaged 20 yards on a kick return and had a touchdown on a kick return. He also had a punt return for a touchdown. So he had 39 touchdowns in 11 games. So he was, I mean, he just was insanely good. I'm actually going to try to find I found it one time, game by game stats in 1988 were just really nuts. So yeah, here's his yards per game. So in a 52-20 win over Miami of Ohio, he had 178 rushing yards on only 18 carries, 3 touchdowns, including a kick return because he didn't play that much. They blew out Texas A&M 52-15, 157 yards on 20 carries. He had 304 yards on 33 carries and 5 touchdowns against Tulsa, 174 yards on 24 carries and 4 touchdowns against Colorado. And remember now, 2 years later, Colorado was playing for a year later. Colorado was the number 1 team playing Notre Dame with a shot at the national championship, by the way. Oklahoma State beat them by 20 with Barry Sanders. You know what they did the rest of the year, Ryan? They lost 4 games that year, Colorado did. They lost to number 9 Oklahoma by 3. They lost to number 7 Nebraska by 7. They gave up 24 combined points in those games, and they lost to BYU by 3. In their other 3 losses, they gave up 44 points. In their game at home against Oklahoma State, they gave up 41 points because Barry Sanders had 4 touchdowns. Against Nebraska, had 189 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns. Against Missouri in a 28-point win, 154 yards and 2 touchdowns. Against Kansas State, 320 yards and 3 touchdowns. Against Oklahoma, 215 yards and 2 touchdowns. Against Kansas, 312 yards and 5 touchdowns. Against Iowa State, he had 293 yards and 4 touchdowns. They played Texas Tech in Tokyo, Japan, and he rushed for 332 yards and 4 touchdowns. And in his last career game in college against Wyoming in a bowl game, he ran for 220 yards and 5 touchdowns in a game that they won by 50, almost 50. So, yeah, Barry Sanders. So that was the same year that Notre Dame won the national championship. And they had Mike Gundy was actually their quarterback that year. Which was
pretty good too, right?
Yeah, what's that?
Gundy was pretty decent quarterback
Yeah,
too,
he
wasn't
was pretty good. I mean, he got overshadowed obviously by Barry Sanders, but yeah, he was pretty good. And then here's the crazy thing, Ryan. I'm pretty sure I'm correct on this, but I don't believe that they counted the bowl game as part of his stats. Just give me a second to clue this in. If I remember correctly, because that was back before they started counting bowl games as statistics. So I believe I'm correct on this. Yes, that is correct. They did not count his bowl game in his part of his 2,600 yards. So if it was counted like it is today, where bowl games count, Barry Sanders that year rushed for 2,850 yards and rushed for 42 touchdowns in 12 games. That was one of the most insane seasons I've ever seen in a Power 5 conference, the Big 12. Big 12 was really good back then, Ryan. Colorado was really good. Oklahoma was really good. I mean, Nebraska was really good. It was the Big 8 is what they were in, but it was a really good league back then at the top. And his lowest output of the season was 157 yards in a 52-15 win. Oh no, I'm sorry. It was 154 yards and a 49-21 win over Missouri. And he had a kick return and a punt return in the first 2 games of the year.
Missouri shut him down that year, is all I hear.
Yeah. So if you go back and look, it's because he didn't play a whole lot in the second half of that game.
Still crazy that they went from Thurman Thomas to Barry Sanders.
Yes.
And that team is just nuts.
Yes. Barry Sanders was a 1-year starter in college.
Seriously. It's wild.
Because the other guy on his team was also a Hall of Famer.
Thurman also Thomas. A Pro Football Hall of Famer.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, Thurman Thomas in 1987 was really, really good, Ryan. He rushed for 1,613 yards and 17 touchdowns. It's really good. Really good, but it just shows how insane Barry Sanders was. And what was funny is Barry Sanders that year rushed for 603 yards off the bench and 9 touchdowns, but he also did a lot more special teams that year. So he had 442 kick return yards on only 14 returns. He averaged 31.6 yards per return, had 2 return touchdowns. He had 15 punt returns.
He was an All-American kick returner.
That's right. Yeah. He had 15 punt returns for 244 yards, 16.3 average, and 2 touchdowns. So he was just so freaking good. He was insane. Really, really insane that year. And of course, Notre Dame won a title that year, and there was great storylines. You had like the Miami-Michigan comeback, you had the Florida State-Miami game. There's just a lot of storylines that year. And then, of course, Notre Dame winning the title was the big one for me. So 88 and 05, or 2005 are my 2. I hope, Ryan, that when this question gets asked next year, that we are – yes, we're talking about 2023. Yeah.
I hope so, too. 2005 would be mine for sure. I mean, that one was – such a rebirth, man, compared to where they were before that. You're just like, this isn't the same team that they had last year. Like, this is just not the same, but it was just completely different. It was great.
Yeah. Beefeater with a super chat, Ryan, as we end it here. So he says, do you, Vince, Sean, have any IB tailgate plans on Saturday? We do not. Since the game is kind of earlier, we'll kind of be getting there on time to cover the game. Vince has, I believe Dylan has a soccer game as well. I'm going to talk more about it tomorrow. But we're actually one thing I do want to make y'all aware of is there's a fundraiser going on campus, and I'm going to talk more about it tomorrow. But just a little quick note on it is we've gotten contacted, Ryan, and actually he sent an email to like everyone on the staff, which I really liked that persistence. But there's a student on campus who works with the Knights of Columbus, and they do a game day fundraiser where he said they are going to be on the South Quad, which is on campus, obviously, in front of the Knights of Columbus building on campus. And they're selling steak sandwiches and chips and drinks. And they also sell Grill Like a Champion t-shirts. They take cash and credit cards, but all the money goes to the people it goes to charity. I asked specifically about how much of the money you raise actually goes to charity. Cause Ryan, that's a big question that I have when people want to do this. And he says, the only money that we don't give to charity is the money we need to just cover the costs of buying the whatever products we need to sell and the plates and those different things. They don't actually make any money off of it themselves. The charities that he sent me information about, it's a lot of great charities that are local charities, that look to help a lot of different types of charities as well. So if you're on campus all day on Saturday, and we'll talk more about this tomorrow and give a little bit more details, swing on over. That's probably the only thing I'm going to do is head on over to there at some point in time. I'll probably actually go up to the press box, drop my stuff off around 12:30, and then head over to the Knights of Columbus thing, just because he did promise me that he'll hook me up with a little sandwich there. But so I'll probably head over there around 12:30, 1 o'clock and support them. So yeah, love this cause, Ryan, because again, it's not a moneymaker for them. It's literally 100% given, like they'll cover the cost of what they're doing, and then after that it goes all to charity. And it's a lot of different charities too, which is kind of what we like to do when we have those kind of fundraisers. And so definitely get out and support them. And if you're there, you may bump into me and we'll see about that. But yeah, definitely do that. But other than that, we don't have any other specific tailgate things planned. It's a work day. It'll be a work day. We are going to have a big tailgate for the Ohio State game, though. We definitely going to have stuff planned for that one. So and Beefeater, thank you very much for the super chat. So Ryan, you want to go ahead and take us out of here, man?
Yeah, I appreciate everyone for joining us today for a little bit of the Notre Dame versus Tennessee State keys to victory and a little bit of a mailbag action afterwards. Also broke down some of the top football games this upcoming week, on top of obviously Notre Dame's game against Tennessee State. Before you go, if you could please do us a solid, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, hit that notification bell if you're listening to us live on YouTube. Getting very close to eclipsing the 15,000 subscriber mark, so please make sure to do so. If you're listening to this on your favorite podcast platform, obviously subscribe there as well. 5-star reviews are very much appreciated. We will be back. Well, we'll be back tonight for IB Nation Sports Talk at 6 o'clock Eastern Time. Sean Stiers will be back, I should say. Tomorrow, we will be back for our Friday free-for-all mailbag at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. If you are bad with times, you should hit that notification bell again, because that will send you a notification every time we're going to go live. So that's Brian Driscoll. I'm Ryan Roberts. We appreciate you again so much for joining us today on the Irish Breakdown podcast.